The regular meeting in the Independent School District 279 School Board is called to order at 6:08 p.m. Tuesday, August 25th, 2020. This regular meeting of the Osseo School Board is being conducted in person and in compliance with the Minnesota Statute 13D.01. However, due to the current pandemic and consistent with directives of the CDC and applicable executive orders, it is not feasible to conduct this meeting in person without restricting the number of persons in attendance. Consistent with current health guidance and applicable executive orders, up to 12 members of the community are able to be present in the boardroom with us tonight, and space has been made for an additional 12 persons to attend on site in the nearby cafeteria. Consistent with the executive order, a face covering is required to be worn during the meeting but may be temporarily removed when speaking. Seated in front of you this evening from my left to your right are Director Kelsey Dawson-Walton, Director Tanya Simons, myself, Director Mike Ostaffi, Director Jackie Mosqueda-Jones, Director Heather Douglas, and Superintendent Corey McIntyre. Superintendent's cabinet and other district administrators are seated in another conference room with a live stream of this meeting being shown on a monitor. Individuals will come into the boardroom as needed. If you may, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Simons, will you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, we are asking for 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence in honor of George Floyd's life. Thank you. Thank you. Board members, in front of you is the agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda this evening? Hearing none, is there a motion to accept the agenda as printed?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor of accepting the agenda as printed, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next agenda item is audience opportunity to address the school board. We have 4 cards this evening. Per the governor's order, Executive Order 2081, Item 10C, speakers may remove their face covering when addressing the board, if they so choose, and so long as the social distancing requirement of 6 feet or more is maintained. After each speaker has finished, the podium microphone will be cleaned with disinfectant. During audience opportunity to address the school board, I will call on each speaker who has submitted a speaker card. We ask that speakers keep their comments to 3 minutes. The board does not take action or discuss matters during this portion of the meeting. Speakers may be referred to the superintendent or staff if follow-up is necessary. The complete guidelines for public participation are provided on the meeting materials table and on the school board section of the district website. When I call your name, please come to the microphone and state your topic, and also state whether or not you are a district resident. With that, let's start with Ms. Kia Zong. Please.
A little bit short.
You can pull it down.
Okay. So, hi to everybody. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I wanted to, as a concerned parent and also a parent of the district as well too, last year, I have a 17-year-old that, his distance learning did not go too well, and we have to spend a lot of time to make sure that we stick to it. And the concern was that throughout the year, we didn't get any follow-up from teachers, on any of his 6 teachers, to see how he's doing and see what we can do to help him. So to do that, we spend a lot of time to just monitor him, making sure that he sent us, an email, follow-up email at the end of the day, what he learned and what subjects he had learned, as well as what homework he has completed. And right now, I have 2 children that have different levels of independence. I have a 17-year-old who can actually log online and learn the lessons. I have a 5-year-old who cannot sit in one spot for over 5 minutes. So my concern is that, as within the district, what can you do and what plans do you have in place to make sure that neither of them fall behind or being left behind academically? And that's one of my main concerns in regards to that piece. And as a parent at the moment, I still don't know what the district's plan is for them, or what plan B is gonna be. Another question that I had was, I see a lot of very concerned teachers as well as parents out there that they say that they feel like their voice are not being heard. I would like to know what are your plans and what the district's plan or the school's plan for those teachers to make sure that they're taking extra precaution to make sure that students and the teachers are saved during the pandemic learning, as well as making sure that the parents understand or they're also engaged during the DL learning for all of the students. And I see on a lot of people post on Facebook that their 5-year-old fell asleep on their chair while they're learning. And I like to see what are your plans in regards to those pieces and how to get those parents engaged and make sure that they stay on top of those children. And as well as for children who have parents that have essential jobs that they have to be at work, what's gonna happen to those 5-year-olds and the 17-year-old? I mean, not everybody are motivated to make sure that they stay on task. If none of the parents are home, there's a possibility that the 17-year-old or the high school or junior high could be sleeping or play video games when they're not at home doing DL. Yep, so these are just my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to ask Barb and Corey if you could follow up with Ms. Zong with some of the information that is on the website, but also any specific follow-up that you can add. Thank you. Next on the agenda is Ms. Jean Fox.
Good evening. My name is Jean Fox, and I'm an ESP here in the district and have been for the last 15 years. My concerns are we've been left out of these conversations. We did de-escalation that you have required us to take, and many had to do it on their phones. We don't have technologies. We're not being told anything. Through the grapevine, now we're hearing that we're going to be distributing these devices, but nobody has talked to us. That's next week. So I guess my concern is, can we include us in the loop? Because usually we're the last to know but the first to go, and it's disheartening. Because we are the first ones that see these kids when they come in the building, and at times we're the last ones they see when they leave the building. Okay? I don't do this for the money. Yes, I enjoy the paycheck. I'm not going to say I deny that. But the money's not there anyway. I do this because I love it. Okay, I'm an ESP at Park Center. I am a ESP at Basswood Elementary for Kids Stop. I have worked your emergency child care. I have worked this summer because subs were so low. I would get called daily because we didn't have subs to go in. And I do it because I do enjoy it. My husband always says, I don't know how you do it because I couldn't. They drive me nuts. Okay? But we gotta be included in this. I know it's hard. Everybody's busy. Everybody's trying to make decisions. I realize you've got to get your teachers in, but we've got to be able to support them like we did when we rocked it on March 16th and 17th. We crammed. I spent nights at 10, 12 o'clock at night trying to fix Schoology things because teachers were just too stressed out, and that's what we're there for. With no complaints, I have no complaints. I have loved working in this district. I have 2 kids that have come through this district. I have a son I'm very proud of that came through Maple Grove Senior High that is now an electrical engineer. He's an essential worker right now during these times. And I have a daughter that has gone back to Normandale after finally finding herself and wanting to become a teacher. I don't want that to be discouraged. I'm just asking, even if you guys can send us an email and say, you know what, we really don't know, but we'll let you know as soon as we do. We're getting nothing from our buildings, from
30
anything.
seconds remaining.
And it's kind of funny, I run every morning with my 2 dogs, or so I call it running. And this morning I was running and everybody was out thinking probably that it was gonna rain. And I let people know when I'm going past them. I warn them, I'm coming by you on the left with 2 dogs. I give them a warning, I give them a heads up. That's all I'm asking, give us a heads up, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. And with that, I would also suggest that there is some follow-up required based upon the communications that have gone out and may need to go out further. Thank you. Next on up is Ms. Maria Higueros-Kine. Welcome.
Hi, I am a teacher in the district at Woodland Elementary. I am a multilingual learner teacher. I am also a mentor in the Osseo area schools Teachers of Color Mentor program. And I'm here to read some of the letter that we sent out to the school board and the superintendent. And it's had to be reduced because I know I only have a couple minutes. So this letter has the support of the Anti-Racist for a Better 279 and the union. We assert that the planning and decision to use the hybrid model upholds systemic racism and does not align with the Policy 101, Racial Equity and Educational Achievement, and the resolution on George Perry, Floyd, and systemic racism. So we ask you to consider the following concerns. So consideration 1, reopening plans are based on county numbers, and there's not enough consideration for the way COVID-19 is impacting our hardest hit cities and communities. Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center have some of the highest cases in the county. Brooklyn Park has 56.8% residents of color and 28% speak another language other than English. Brooklyn Center has 61.5% residents of color and 34.4% speak another language other than English. While Black and Latinx communities make up 5 and 6% of the state's population, each group makes up 20% of confirmed cases in the state. 14 schools in our district, largely in the east side, are identified as over 50% students of color. Overall, students of color account for 58% of the student population in our district. As of August 4th, Brooklyn Park COVID-19 cases were 37.6 per 10,000, whereas Maple Grove cases were 17.4 per 10,000. It is not equitable to look at only Hennepin County data when communities of color are affected at such high levels. The resolution on George Perry Floyd and systemic racism requires board members and all leaders to address racial disparities directly in every policy, including training and accountability. Consideration 2, communities of color are disproportionately affected by COVID-19 pandemic. Latinx children are 8 times more likely to be hospitalized than their white counterparts, and for Black children, it's 5 times more. In Minnesota, people of color make up 63% of the deaths among adults under age 64, and they only make up 16% of the population. Because Osseo is choosing a hybrid model despite having an extremely high BIPOC population, it appears that district leadership is appealing to its more privileged and/or West Side base who may not have witnessed the devastating impacts of COVID-19 due to systemic inequalities. I'm going to skip on to the end. There is a profound disconnect this district has between their stated vision for equity and their inability to prioritize resources and support to carry it out. We are tired of having the language of equity used without true commitment to decentralized whiteness and its social and political and economic hold in our schools, especially as Osseo plans for reopening. When communities of color are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, it is essential that you center their health and concerns to develop more creative and equitable solutions that provide more educational access and meaningful participation and do not risk the lives and well-being of our beloved students, families, and employees. Every district has the option to follow a more conservative return to school plans if they feel that it is in the best interest of their students and staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Brett Freiseth.
I'm Brett Freiseth, high school teacher at Osseo Senior High School, EL and Science. School board members, Michael Staffy and Superintendent McIntyre, staff, families, and the community, I want to acknowledge the difficult realities that have led to shutting down Freedom Schools this summer. For those who are not familiar with Freedom Schools, according to the Children's Defense Fund, through CDF Freedom Schools model, we empower youth to excel and believe in their ability to make a difference in themselves, their families, communities, country, and world with hope, education, and action. Rooted in the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project of 1964, the CDF Freedom Schools program has historically and continues to be part of the Black Community Crusade for Children. The CDF Freedom Schools program is a 6-week summer literacy and cultural enrichment program designed to serve children and youth in grades K through 12 in communities where quality academic enrichment programming is limited, too expensive, or non-existent. By partnering with schools, faith, and community-based organizations, municipalities, colleges, and universities, we are able to offer this program in communities at no cost. The CDF Freedom Schools program enhances children's motivation to read and makes them feel good about learning. At the same time, the program connects to families to the right resources in their communities. Freedom School students engage in a research-based, multicultural, integrated reading curriculum that supports them and their families through 5 essential components. This summer was the 5th year I've had the privilege to work in Freedom Schools in Osseo as a site testing manager. I know for those of us who have worked in the program, it was all of our hopes that the scholars in the program would be able to continue to benefit from the very measurable and even unmeasurable impact it has had on them and how they see themselves and the world around them. This is especially true given the loss of in-person learning during the pandemic, and even more necessary given the disproportional effects it has had on Black, Indigenous, and other students of color whose races are affirmed in Freedom Schools, and for the students who are not students of color but are also greatly impacted because of their socioeconomic status and other factors. It is not my place to make suppositions about why the staff felt the way they did or how they responded to those feelings. I also would like to acknowledge that they too have been disproportionately impacted in their families and communities, which is what makes it all the more unfortunate. In no way do I second guess
30
their
seconds
decision-making
remaining.
processes, as I have no firsthand knowledge of what was discussed. I would like to affirm the work of Sharon Taylor, Michael Lehan, Rev Hillstrom, and the site coordinators, as well as the Freedom School staff, including ESPs, nurses, cooks, and custodians, for our scholars in our district and beyond, as well as the roles they have had and hopefully will continue to have in mentoring of our SLIs. I speak for no one but myself today. I have heard statements speaking against the characters of these
Time.
upstanding pillars of our community. This is not my experience, and I want to truly, truly thank them for all the hard work they have put into Freedom Schools as a reality for our scholars in our district who need it most. I know from the work I do and have done that the work of all these people goes without pay, without recognition, without any expectation of such to make Freedom Schools an asset to this district. I'm honored and humbled to work alongside each of these people every year I am allowed to do so. I so very much value them as colleagues, mentors, and leaders for myself and our district. All of that said, I just want to share some of the data that I think is really important. In 2018, 70% of our students showed growth in their reading levels, with an average gains of being 1.7 grade levels in reading in only 6 weeks. In 2019, 72% of students showed growth in their reading levels, with the average gains being an increase of 1.2 grade levels in reading, again, in only 6 weeks. Unfortunately, I do not have post-test data to show the impact of Freedom Schools this past summer. I will say that at Northview, where I worked, there was clear evidence that the youngest scholars, kindergarten and first grade, were the ones most behind in their reading levels. These were scholars who had mostly not attended Freedom Schools previously and had not received the basic literacy instruction in person at the end of the school year they so desperately needed. It is clear evidence that there is a need for Freedom Schools in the future. I want to be sure that the board and the district knows the value of this program. It would sicken me if the concerns of this past summer caused some people to want to eliminate the program, as it has been invaluable to those served by the program. Please continue to offer this amazing program in Osseo area schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. It was an unfortunate incident this summer, and no one that I've ever spoken to has any issues about continuing with the program. Thank you. With that, the next agenda item is the superintendent's report. Mr. McIntyre.
All right, good evening. Nice to be back in person in our meetings. We're all getting used to that again. It's been a few months, so thank you everyone for being patient with finding our traction on how to do these in-person meetings again. As part of the superintendent's report, we typically share points of pride, and tonight I'll be covering some of the back-to-school points of pride as we get ready to start the new school year. And this time each year, I like to give an update on the Enrollment Center because it's very active right now, and that might not be something people are aware of. The Enrollment Center continues to enroll families into the district and provide very important services. Many of those services never did stop during the pandemic, and we've been safely open since July 6th. I want to thank the Enrollment Center staff, too, for their commitment to helping students get enrolled. So families no longer are required to come to the Enrollment Center, and they can submit their enrollment materials by email, fax, Dropbox, or U.S. mail. And this includes all types of enrollments, new enrollments, change of address, choice school approvals, re-enrollments, early childhood special education evaluations, and reversal to homeschool. Enrollment packets and forms and applications are now fillable online, and this has streamlined the enrollment process for many families who can now just fill out the packet online and email it to complete. Official back-to-school season dates, so between the last 6 weeks, August 3rd, this is our official season, we call it, August 3rd to September 11th. And during this time, we are enrolling about 40 students per day. We have, since July 25th, had 800 new enrollments, and we're averaging about 125 phone contacts per day. About a quarter of those calls are related to our new Distance Learning Academy and hybrid questions, as you can imagine. Most times the Enrollment Center is the first point of contact for our families, so we're doing a lot of educating on those learning models and helping with the many questions that we're all wrestling with. Other services, just to point out, that are happening at the Enrollment Center during this back-to-school season. Transportation staff are available there to answer questions. and provide bus stop information. Food service staff are also available to help with applications for free and reduced lunch. And our Northwest Immunization Clinic is there to help ensure enrollments are complete and that they can attend school on the first day. We will do probably about 400 immunizations during this window of time. And during the back-to-school season, our homeless liaison will meet with around 150 families. Last year, we served about 522 families through our homeless liaison support. So transitioning into new teacher workshop, we have about 90 new teachers this year joining the school district. And as we begin this year on unprecedented times, we're very excited to launch in kind of a reimagined orientation week that provides our new teachers with the tools and information to have a successful start to the year. So this newly revised orientation that's happening this week includes a variety of new methodologies and a lot of online team meetings and self-directed study that introduces our new teachers to our district and helps them transition into their new role. We've worked hard to partner with EMO and helping to meet those new teachers through a welcome drive-through, a lot of drive-throughs in the last few months, providing a box lunch and a goodie bag just to help them feel a part of the Osseo School District family. Over the course of the week, the new teachers will receive professional development on our Equity Foundation training, an overview of our curriculum and instruction and student services departments, and finally they'll have time to set up and prepare for instruction either in their classrooms or offices, along with some building level and orientation through distance learning models. So also want to talk about our transportation department. We had our staff welcome this morning for our bus drivers. And just a little bit of information gives you some context of the work that our transportation department does. We typically transport in a normal year, I don't know if there's such a thing anymore, about 3.5 million miles. And last year we still did about 2.6 million of miles, even though we had the shortened year with the COVID-19 pandemic and closures. This past spring and summer, our transportation team has been instrumental in ensuring that students had meals, materials, and technology for distance learning. They also transported students that had participated in our emergency child care worker program, and we utilized about 55 vehicles and drivers for that service. This year we'll have about 175 yellow buses and about 264 vans, so a lot of vehicles to transport our students. And we had almost 200 participants in our call this morning through Zoom. It was very much a virtual welcome back, and that was our largest attendance ever. So that was a really successful morning, and our bus drivers and bus ESPs were embracing this technology world we're living in right now. We did have several students who participated in the state level school bus safety poster contest and placed at the state level, so we're very proud of our Osseo students for participating. Just a couple updates on some district facilities work that's happening. On the facilities side, we've had a pretty busy summer with many projects going on across the district, and try to make sure those were completed on time for the first day of school. A big reason for that is we were able to get a jump start on those projects in May. Normally we wouldn't be able to start till June. So we did some of the highlights that we completed or were able to work on this summer were the Birch Grove Phase 1 renovation project. Both Elm Creek and Rice Lake had work done in the cafeteria, gym, and restroom areas. Fair Oaks and the Osseo Education Center also had work done in the student restroom areas. Brooklyn Middle and Park Center had work completed in the pool area, locker room areas, and the adjacent Park Center hallway area. And even though there's been some delays with some lower level lockers, we're still confident we're going to complete that work on time. Exterior work at Brooklyn Middle, OALC, Northview Middle, Maple Grove Middle, and the Ice Arena, as well as the ESC here, as many of the staff here were experiencing that roof project this summer. And also exterior work done at Weaver Lake and Oakview. And finally, our pavement work across the district is almost complete, aside from some striping that needs to be done over a few weekends. And we've spent nearly $1 million on getting flooring and work done on our parking lot. So we're excited to have that done on time as well. So you'll get an update on more of those projects in November. And lastly, our fall sports and activities have started and are in full swing, even though they're a bit modified this year. Fall games and matches are starting mostly this week. Practices started a few days ago, and all three high schools' fall sports and activities include some activities around football, volleyball, girls and boys soccer, girls and boys cross country, girls swim and dive, girls tennis, sideline cheer, and school musicals and pep band. So we are excited to have students back in those activities and participating, as it's been a long time since we've been able to do that. And then lastly, just a couple announcements. Our Ready to Restart section of the district website continues to be a clearinghouse for all of our information about the start of the new school year. I would particularly invite parents and community members to review the frequently asked questions section on the site as we continue to add new questions and answers every week. You'll find information on a variety of topics from our HVAC systems to face coverings and expectations and what's happening around those things, and our plans when and if we have confirmed cases of COVID in our buildings. And again, our website's district279.org. I do want to give acknowledgement too. We had our 10th annual Reading is Fun Run Walk, which took place virtually this year in the first 2 weeks of August. I know me and my family participated and submitted some pictures that weren't very flattering. We were grateful for all of our sponsors and volunteers and participants who did the event virtually, and we were still able to raise over $18,000 for District Media Center. So congratulations to the foundation and all the hard work that went into planning the event. Also, I'm proud to announce that Office Depot will be donating 1,000 backpacks tomorrow, August 26th, at Zanewood. These backpacks are going to be filled with school supplies for Zanewood and Fair Oak students and distributed to families via a car line starting about 3 p.m. So this is part of the Start Proud program that Office Depot has, and it's really around, it's a philanthropic program that invests in school communities across the country, like here in Osseo, providing students and classroom supplies to help the school students, families, and teachers start the new year in a confident, prepared way. And we're very grateful and honored to be selected as the only school district in Minnesota to be a part of the Start Proud program this year. So we're looking forward to that event tomorrow. Chair Ostafi, with that concludes my board report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent McIntyre. And that new website is restart.district279.org. You can go to that directly without the menu. Next on the agenda is the school board committee reports. Director Dawson-Walton, do you have a committee report or committee update?
I do have a few of them. Can you? Okay, so the Brooklyn Bridge Alliance for Youth met last week, and just moving toward it. As a reminder, it's an alliance between several areas: Brooklyn Park City Council, Park and Rec, the Police Department, and Brooklyn Center, inclusive of the Police Department, the Parks and Rec, the mayor, and Robbinsdale. I'm probably forgetting Robbinsdale, and then us, Maple Grove, Anoka Hennepin, I'm sorry. And so that process really looks at, we're moving toward a strategic planning process. The Brooklyn Bridge Alliance has been going strong, but, it's a point that we're looking at to reevaluate the priorities, given the real shift in landscape. How are we engaging our youth in our communities and informing how we move forward and kind of relook at our district and our really more on our engagement side. So the next meeting is November 18th. The other, I'm also part of the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. And so our last meeting was about a week and a half ago, and we heard, we have continuous updates from the MD and Commissioner Ricker and Deputy Commissioner Mueller, who answered some questions about the start of the year. And we also heard from Secretary of State Steve Simon, and then our next meeting is September 11th, and I am excited to announce that I was elected to be Vice Chair of Association of Metropolitan School Districts, so I'm really looking forward to that. And right now, as part of that, we're really looking at the legislative agenda as we move forward and building what that's going to look like. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Director Simons, do you have a committee report or committee update?
No, I do not have any.
Thank you. Director Mosqueda-Jones, do you have a committee report or update?
I do. I get the pleasure of telling you about the riveting meeting we had at the Policy Committee on August 13th. After we looked through all of the policies in Series 500 and with some other suggestions by General Counsel Tim Palmatier, we decided that we would look over and review the following policies for this coming school year. Are you ready? It's a list. Here we go. Policy 203, School District Bylaws. Policy 413, Prohibition Against Discrimination, Harassment, and Violence. Policy 503, Attendance and Absences. Policy 506, Student Discipline. Policy 516, Student Medication. Policy 532, Use of Police Officers and Crisis Teams to remove students from school grounds. Policy 542, Extended Field Trips. Policy 546, Shared Time Students. Policy 555, Student Recognition. Policy 556, Release Time for Religious Instruction. We're planning on taking a series every year and making sure that they're updated and look through them so that we can make them more applicable. The next policy committee meeting that you really don't want to miss is scheduled to be held here at the ESC on Tuesday, October 6th at 4:30 p.m. Policy committee meetings are open to the public and community members are encouraged to attend. Just drink some coffee before you come. Just kidding. We're a great bunch of people.
Thank you, Director Mosqueda-Jones. Director Douglas, do you have a committee report or committee update?
I do, thank you. I'll also serve on multiple committees. Several of them have not been operating, obviously, due to the current situation that our district is in. However, I also serve on 287, which is our sister school district. A lot of our highest need students attend school in that district. And I was unable to attend the emergency board meeting that was held because it conflicted with our board meeting. And basically, what we're doing over there is the same thing that we're doing here. We're getting ready to get kids back into school and plan how we will do that. Our next meeting will be in 2 days on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. And that will be online, and it is open to the public to view, so I encourage you to participate if you can. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Douglas. And I have an update to Jackie's report. I was also at that policy meeting. And why do we review them? Well, some laws have changed and we need to update them. Some of them were simply due to the 15 years old and they need to be updated in format. Some of them are no longer needed, and some of them Tim couldn't figure out why we ever had a policy. So that's why we review them, to make sure they are up to date, meet the law, and meet the needs of the district. So thank you very much, and it is a little bit more exciting than Director Mosqueda-Jones sets it out to be. The next item, next agenda item, is the presentation, monitoring report A to F, opening of school fall 2020 planning update. Superintendent McIntyre.
Chair Osseo, hard to follow your policy show, but I'll try. Chair Osseo, members of the board, Tim Palmetier, and those in the audience, and those in our viewing audience too, I appreciate that the challenges we can't have more people present here, but it is nice to get back into some in-person meetings here. So tonight we're going to provide you with an update on our work on our Minnesota Safe Learning Plan for Osseo area schools and an updated recommendation for the safe opening of the school year. The next slide, Joan. So just by, Olga, if you can go back one, please.
Okay.
Might have jumped on you, thank you. The objectives for tonight's presentation are 4 key things. So we want to do a quick review of some of the key elements of the Minnesota Safe Learning Plan, update you on the county and city level case data around COVID-19, and then update you on key indicators for the staffing and instructional preparedness efforts that have been going on. And lastly, a recommendation for the start of the 2020 school year, what we're calling our ISD 279 Safe Learning Plan Levels model. And to have efficiency in the meeting tonight and to kind of help us adhere to the proper social distancing requirements, we're going to do this a little differently. There will be an opportunity for board members to ask questions after each section of each presentation, so we can minimize the amount of transition time between the forum room and the boardroom with our cabinet members tonight. So we'll do that a little differently this evening. Appreciate your understanding. Next slide. So just by way of review, on July 21st when we met at our board meeting, we talked to you about the work that was being done since June by about 70 members of our planning team that served, they all served in 4 different work groups in anticipation of the governor's executive order and state direction on the opening of schools. And we went through those models that we thought were coming. Then on July 30th, we learned more about the governor's order that states Minnesota schools adhere to the parameters determined by MDH, or the Minnesota Department of Health, in implementing or shifting between the 3 learning models laid out for the school year planning guidance, which are in-person learning, hybrid learning, and distance learning. Next slide. Then on August 4th, after receiving that direction from the state on July 30th, at the special board meeting we had on August 4th, we presented to the board an update on our planning efforts on the 3 models directed by the state, and our recommendation to start the year in a hybrid model based on the information we had available to us at that time. Next slide. I do want to just highlight some of my comments I made on August 4th and August 13th, that even though at that point we were recommending the start of the year in the hybrid model, that over time we knew it was very possible numbers may suggest a more conservative model such as distance learning, and we would continue to work with our team on the preparedness training and ongoing evaluation of our opening of school plan. And I've been trying to kind of be a repeated broken record on that and stress that things can change fairly rapidly as we kind of keep moving forward with some uncertainty and unknowns. Next slide. So this is our District 279 version of the state's Safe Learning Plan, and you'll notice that the dial moves from left to right according with how restrictive the level is. On the left is the most restrictive level, which is full distance learning, and most people would think of that as where we were last spring when we were put in complete distance learning model by the state. Next, on the right is the least restrictive level, full in-person learning with Distance Learning Academy, and you'll notice that we have Distance Learning Academy with each of the 4 levels because that is a requirement we have to offer for the entire school year. And you'll note in addition to the 3 instructional models shown here, on the previous slide, we've added another level here, what we're referring to as Distance Learning Plus, which just means distance learning for all with some optional targeted in-person support for designated students. And those optional supports will be determined in consultation with parents and guardians and will be offered to, some examples might be some students who receive special education services, English learner services, or some mental health services. And because, like I said, the state requires a 100% distance learning option, you'll see that as part of all 4 options because, as we know, many families have opted to just select that choice for the entire year. All right, next slide. And this is something we've looked at before, but it's worth reviewing again. It's part of our ongoing process that school districts to determine their Safe Schools model in considering and making a change to the learning model must do so first and foremost, with the interest of safety for school staff and students in mind. And there's a 5-step process here that we've been going through, and I've been going through almost daily, it feels like, but regularly since August 4th. And that includes consulting with the Minnesota Department of Health, learning model selection parameters, and really looking at the county level data now that we have some city level data to give it some context, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Consult with health officials, which for us has been Hennepin County Public Health, to examine the local epidemiology behind the county level data and really look at trends in the numbers as they continue to be evaluated moving forward. And we also then on step 3 evaluate the ability to implement, and this is a key piece, implement our not only our required health best practices from just an operational standpoint and how well we're able to put those in place at a school or district level. Step 4 is determining the learning model to begin the year. And all school districts have been wrestling with this. I think if you've watched around, we're all getting new information all the time and shifting is occurring. And then monitoring that community and school-wide level impact of on a very regular basis. So I've been talking with, as you'll see in a minute here, Hennepin County, our Minnesota Department of Health, and Minnesota Department of Education on a very highly frequent basis. I think they're getting tired of me calling because we're constantly evaluating our progress. And then lastly, I'll just kind of add here that we're really trying to make sure we're implementing the best practices around required health practices for in-person, hybrid learning, and any distance learning considerations we're giving for our staff and students. So the next section here, I'm going to walk through some of our updated data here. So if you go to the next slide and maybe one more. So I'm going to cover a little bit of the model that we're required through the governor's direction, and then our MDE, MDH, and Hennepin County guidance. And we've looked at this previously, and it's important to look at again. In order to determine that base learning model, school districts will be advised of kind of a bi-weekly case rate, and now we're getting those 14-day windows of case rates every week by county and by city. And the case rate data are the number of cases in the county of residents over a 14-day window per 10,000 people by the date the specimen was collected. Next slide. And this chart reflects the model parameters for school districts based on the number of cases per 10,000 over 14 days. And districts are allowed to go to a more restrictive model if they choose, but cannot go into a less restrictive model without support of the Department of Health and Department of Education. And so when we started in on August 4th, when we made our initial decision, our county data put us right kind of in the middle there in the 20 to 29 range for hybrid learning for all students. And that was our recommendation, and the board supported that on August 4th. Next slide. And this was that data we had up to that point. So we were right over the threshold of 20. It was 20.93 at the time. And this chart kind of gives the review of the trend that we were seeing at that point in time. School districts had not received any city level data that could give some additional context, and now they're providing that for cities over 10,000 residents. That started on August 7th. Per state guidance in local information about outbreaks and community spread and groups of people becoming ill at the highest rates we're being very strongly encouraged to use as strong components in understanding how the virus is impacting communities. And we've been advised to use that city level information, which I'll show momentarily here, to give additional context and situational awareness to our districts as it gives a little deeper understanding beyond just the county number. And that's been a developing conversation with our local Hennepin County partners and the Department of Health. So next slide. So here's an updated range of numbers here. Since our last decision, we've had 3 more data points provided. And you can see here that we just got the new information on Thursday of last week. We get it each Thursday. And the last countywide rate went from 23.77 to 21.97. So just a decrease just slightly under 2 cases per 10,000. So that's the countywide rate. As we look at more closely at our cities that we can get citywide data on, which is next slide, please. Thank you. It's important to respect that the impact of a shift in learning model will have on our community. So we take that very seriously, and any changes need to be really well thought out, and really been watching this closely. And what we learned here is, as we look back, this past week on Thursday was the first time that Hennepin County put out publicly the local city data for the larger cities above 10,000 residents in the county. So these are our 3 cities that qualify for that. And Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and Maple Grove are included. In Brooklyn Park, after 4 reporting periods of regular increases in case rates, the last reporting period did decrease a bit from 37.6 to 33.6. And it was pointed out to us by our health partners that the case rate has now remained over 30 since the July 14th through 27 reporting period, and they really look at a pattern of at least 3 data points, which is we've been advised is a significant benchmark. In Brooklyn Center, it's been even higher, maintained at 42.2 the last 2 reporting periods, and has been in the 30s and 40s for 4 reporting periods in a row. And then in Maple Grove, the numbers actually reduced from 17.2 to 13.7 per 10,000, and they're at their lowest mark since the June 30th to July 13th reporting period. Next slide. So in consultation with the 3 agencies that we're required to talk with, I want to highlight some of the guidance that we've been receiving. And I'll start with first the Department of Health guidance. And this was updated as of last Friday with my most recent meetings with them. These are the summary points of their guidance, and even though there are differences in our city data, they're strongly reminding us that students, staff, parents, families, and our community do intermingle between communities, and it's really difficult to isolate with time as communities are mixing, hard to do clear isolation on impact. We were encouraged to go with the highest case rate for additional context for decision making, and the epidemiology departments, both at Hennepin County and at the Department of Health, felt that we were seeing very, very high rates in our Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center areas of our district, which is about 50% of our student enrollment. They're concerned about the fact that the trend data is up, even there was one data point going down, so time will tell whether that turns into a trend. But the trend is still up, and that the epidemiology team was really feeling like they were concerned about our approach using a hybrid model, and were advising us and guiding us to be more cautious in our efforts to try to open. And we're very supportive of the concept of a distance learning decision now that we have had more data the last 3 weeks versus the initial information we had August 4th. If you go to the next slide, I might have covered some of these points, but I'll verify here. The other talking points from MDH is that there's definitely serious reason to be concerned about the trends we're seeing, and that they pointed out to us we'd be very justified in opening in distance learning. Their advice is open in person when you have high confidence you can stay open and have that be sustainable for a period of time versus rushing to open and then rushing to close very soon thereafter. So they advise us to set a reevaluation date in about a month's time, and that's their best guidance, and then determine that again and keep making that kind of decision-making plan, and that's their current guidance too. So as it was kind of described to us, take more time to plan and err on the side of safety, be in the prevention mode versus putting yourself in a position to be in reaction mode, and really consider also the operational and staff readiness components of not just the case rates, but our internal readiness to open. So you'll hear more about those components here in just a little bit. And then when talking with Hennepin County, next slide, Joan, thank you. So at the county level, again, as we talked with our partners at the epidemiology, we talked with the supervising epidemiologist at Hennepin County, and they shared with us that those rates in Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center are of high concern. Clearly a greater impact on people of color in our district in particular with our numbers, and potential increases of cases in schools. As schools and businesses open, they're very concerned about that potential being there. They also pointed out to us, which I thought was interesting, that there is some concern about some underreporting in areas that already have high rates. And despite the recent decline, which we hope becomes a trend, we all want everyone feeling healthy and not being sick, but that there's still, the trend data now still indicates an overall increase in rates across clearly specific parts of our district, and that's not true on the Maple Grove side, but it is on the Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center side. Next slide, Joan. Then when talking with the Minnesota Department of Education, we pointed out this dilemma we have with our county rates tell us one thing, and that technically supports the hybrid model that we selected and the board supported August 4th. Yet there's a significant portion of our district with very high numbers, and that their recommendation is to be very conscientious and have a strong situational awareness around the understanding of that context locally. So, and of course that was, as we're getting those city numbers, it's just adding depth to our understanding of what's happening. There's the Department of Education's guidance is, err on the side of keeping people safe and healthy, start school in the safest way possible, and be ready to be less restrictive when the rates decline and readiness improves. And clearly that they identified that with our size of a district and having multiple cities, you know, that's a unique thing for us, and we already know that, but that was a very unique situation for us with wide-ranging case data. And their guidance is to err again on the side of safety and continue to watch that data as it moves forward. But that they pointed out distance learning is currently appearing to be the wise decision at this point from the Department of Education's standpoint. So I'm going to pause here. This is a good section to stop before I ask some of our cabinet members to come in, and I'll just pause there before we get to some of those additional indicators of staffing and instructional preparedness for questions.
Let's start with Tony Simons.
Okay. So on August 3rd, Brooklyn Park offered free COVID testing. Was there any information on how that may or may not have affected the rates that were reported thereafter?
That was not pointed out to me in our conversations. I could follow up and ask about that, but it wasn't pointed out as a
Okay, because that was not offered elsewhere in our district. I just wanted to understand that. Additionally, is it published anywhere from MD8 or MDE that they say the safest way is to use the highest numbers in a district? Is that published anywhere?
I've only received it in a conference call with, like, it's also come through on our superintendent commissioner calls, so it possibly could be included in the last week's guidance. I'd have to go back and verify, but I can follow up, Tanya, to see if they've actually published it, because I've only received it through the consultation process.
Okay, because I'd want to understand if that's guidance that they're providing to all school districts in the state or only selectively providing that information.
And I'll add too, if it helps, the epidemiologist from the Department of Health also encouraged us to think through that with that framework in mind too.
Okay. Sorry, it's really hard to breathe and talk. On 8/20, the email from Hennepin County containing the data sent to school districts and to city administrators included a bullet point that specifically says, quote, "We continue to recommend against using city-level data alone to assess COVID-19 risk in a community." And then it goes on.
Yep. So I'd
so
agree. We wouldn't want to use that alone. That's the key word. So our preparedness information later tonight's a really critical factor for us. And I think the clear guidance has been start with the county data and then use that city data as context and awareness of what's giving you depth of knowledge on what's happening.
Right. Okay, so that's just curious that that's still being published in emails and then verbally communicated somewhat differently. And then the parameters for the learning model, 30 to 49 cases per 10,000 over 14 days, hybrid learning for elementary students, distance learning for secondary students. So that's the published guidance from the state, and it looks like our city numbers are still within that particular frame of reference, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, that's all the questions I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Dawson-Walton.
I think I just have some comments. Just from, I think, you have to look at this holistically, and I think the most important aspect of any of this is safety. I mean, the health and safety of our students and our staff and our families. And so as I look around the metro, I don't know, Superintendent McIntyre, if you know this, but not that we always compare, but it just seems like there are some districts that have pivoted given data, not only data, but just looking at readiness, looking at where it's trending, a lot of different considerations. So do you have an idea of around how many might have switched over? I mean, I think there's been a lot of flurry in the last week or so.
I don't know exactly how many switched over, but I did hear through my network that there's about I heard the number today of 17 districts around the metro that have moved or started with the distance learning model.
Okay, thank you.
And I do know AMSD is collecting that from all 45 member districts, and so that likely will be probably complete by even this week. as people are submitting their final plans.
Okay, thank you. I think it's really hard to look at, as we know, numbers alone, and I think it's a huge, I think that there's so many, unknowns here, that and things are changing. We've had to be very flexible as a state, actually, in pivoting a lot around some of the decisions that are made. And, my concern is around consistency. And the last thing I would want is, one of the bullets, I don't know if it's on here, was one of the considerations there, like, I don't know if it's on the last slide, but what model is going to ensure that you're not going to have to shut down right away again? And that's a huge concern of mine, is just consistency. And as a community, we are one district, so it absolutely matters when if a city like a Brooklyn Park, for example, has higher numbers than a Maple Grove, that matters because we're one district. And so I guess my last comment is just I really appreciate just this initial kind of piece. I know we have more to go, but just the thoughtfulness around this, around just ensuring that priority is health and safety for our students and our staff and our district. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Director Douglas.
Thank you, Chair Ostafi. I have some questions. I noticed in the slides between the Hennepin County data through August 8th and the local city data that the date ranges used are not the same.
Correct. Their city data comes 2 days later than the county data.
Okay. So even though we received the data later, why are we not evaluating it for the same date ranges? Like, that's a
They're
concern.
basically the same date ranges, just 2 days different. So it's a 2-week window.
Sure.
The city does is 2 weeks, 2 days behind with their 2-week window.
Okay.
And that's what we're provided with.
Right. I also noticed that according to our local city data, if we isolate the 3 groups that are provided, now we serve more than just these 3 cities, and we don't have data for any of the other cities we serve, correct?
Correct. No communities under 10,000 residents have data published. Only cities of 10,000 residents or more are included in.
Plymouth has more than 10,000 residents.
They do, yeah. Yeah, that's
And
right.
we don't have that
Actually, I
data?
think I do have Plymouth data now. I can get that to you. Yep,
Okay.
thank you. Good catch. I think I do have it.
Yeah, I'm guessing Rogers also?
Ooh, I'll verify.
I'm
What?
not sure on Dayton. I know obviously Osseo doesn't, but just curious what our other cities are looking like.
And I sent you that whole chart last week, but I'll resend it if you would like to see
Sure.
it again.
I can look at it. It's not in here, in our public meetings, so that was something I was wondering about. And then also, when we look at Maple Grove, it clearly falls in a different category, and I understand that the recommendation is to not look at one city, or to use that as the only frame of reference. I'm curious why we're receiving conflicting information when the executive order specifically identifies this Hennepin County, or this county case rate model to be used, and now we're hearing that we should be also considering the cities. My understanding was that we should not be considering the cities separately, but the unit as a whole. Do you have any specific information about why that has changed?
We didn't have city-specific information when the governor's order first came out, so my best explanation for that is as the counties have become better at collecting the data more specifically, because now that we're talking with MDH and MDE, they're saying use that information as a part of, like you said, a number of factors. So hopefully we're hearing that a number of variables really need to be considered.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us, and if you look at our cities, that number of 21 doesn't look as useful when we have such a wide range. We
Right.
have much more precise understanding of what's currently happening in our communities, right? So.
So another question I have is we talk a lot about the safety of our students, which is something really, really important to me. And a concern that I have is that if we move to a full distance learning model, how many of our students are going to be home alone all day? Do we know? Are we collecting that data? And how are we supporting those families so that those children are safe?
We have not collected that specific information other than what we collected in our spring distance learning surveys. And I can't tell you if that was a specific question on that survey or not. I'd have to go back and check.
Okay. So for the record, I think that that's something that we need to know. We need to know how many of our children are going to be home alone, and what are the ages of these kids? And how are we going to specifically support those families who don't have an adult in the home to help monitor their education and their safety while they're learning? So that's all I have right now.
Thank you. Director Mosqueda-Jones?
I was gonna ask questions about, what our childcare would look like under distance learning and distance learning plus, for similar, just so that I know if families will have an ability to use those, and if we're going to be able to offer sliding fee or scholarships for families.
Brian is here tonight. I don't know if you want to tackle that now or near the end of the presentation. It's really kind of up to you, but he is
That's
available to answer childcare questions if you'd like.
I can bring that up later.
Okay,
That works.
thank
Is
you.
it? Thank you. I do have a couple questions. First off, in order for Maple Grove's numbers to have gone from 18 to 17 to 13 and change over that period of time, it would suggest that currently Maple Grove may be in single digits or very close to that, which would suggest the full opening under the governor's guideline. Is that correct?
I cannot speak to that because this is one data point, and they've been very clear about using trends, 3 data points as a trend. So if we see another week of that, now you get a little more confidence in that being true. But I'm not going to speculate on
Oh,
that.
the trend is definitely there, but what I'm saying is to go from almost 18 to 14 in a period of 7 days, most of those numbers had to be extremely close to below 10. So that's just math. The other piece of it is, going to Director Simon's piece, we have no confidence in the numbers if we have no idea how many tests were given. If we had 1,000 tests in Brooklyn Park one week and 3,000 the next, wouldn't you suggest that there would be more cases caught?
I am not a health expert, and I'm not pretending to be one.
So
I-
we don't know. There is no information provided to us, or it sounds like to the district, on the actual rate of testing that goes on in a community.
I am happy to follow up with the epidemiologist with those questions.
Okay, that would be very good to know. So, and with that, I do believe
Sure.
the spring survey had suggested that we have a large majority of the parents did want to open in person, correct? And those that did not were given the opportunity for DLA, and 25% chose that. So, so we had opportunities
Yep,
or
absolutely.
options. Okay. All right.
Chair, I'm sorry, I wasn't quite finished. I know I often pause between questions quite a bit, and I apologize for that. I wanted to make sure that we do know for a fact that Black students and Latinx, and there's newer evidence on our Southeast Asian families being affected by COVID at a much higher rate, and that we have a large population. I just wanted to reiterate that, and then if we are going to be following our systemic racism resolution, that needs to be of high consideration. I also want to say that the discussion of people have a right to, or have had the opportunity to choose is more of an illusion of choice. We have families that don't have the option to choose because they're overwhelmed, they didn't get the information. Our EL families got the translations very late through, I'm not blaming anyone for that because it's very timely and very costly to get translations out. And so saying that the people that didn't choose DLA want hybrid is a misrepresentation of what actually may be the truth. So I hate to make any kind of bets on that. And I'm also not going to, I'm going to encourage not to use any data that was taken in the spring because things have changed significantly since the spring. And I had one other thing, but I'll have to bring it back later because it left.
Okay.
And Chair,
Board members, do you have any other questions?
Oh.
No, go ahead.
I also wanted to say that, I mean, I think we have to caution, like, what we're asking our families. I think if we're gonna start asking families to self-report if their kids are gonna be home, it kind of makes me a little nervous. There's a lot of implications to that, and that's really not our, that our area. I mean, I think we want to work with families, but I just can't get, I mean, it's like, we can't ignore the disproportionality of the impact that COVID has on our community. Whew, it's hard to talk in this. And so I just, I think that none of us are epidemiologists. We're not in the healthcare field. And just like last time when we voted, we really listened to the recommendations of MDH, MDE, our administration, the county, and now we're in the same, and we've already kind of kept this door open to listen to where things are trending, to listen to our teachers, our ESPs, and our administration, and so I very much respect this thoughtfulness, and I think that the line of questioning is a little concerning to me. Put it that way.
Are we ready?
Any other questions?
Chair Ostafi, I'd like to respond.
Okay. Just one question so we can move on to all the supporting background.
Sounds good. I just wanted to say, Kelsey, you make a really good point. I don't think that our families should be forced to self-report whether or not their kids are home alone or not. I was simply trying to make the point that we're going to have a lot of kids home alone and it's not safe. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead if you want to
Okay, thank you.
continue.
Yep, I know we're trying to do this a little differently, so I appreciate it. And we're going to move on to one of our key indicators is our staffing preparedness as we look at our model. So Laurel Anderson's here. And then I've asked Kelly Wilson from our EMO to also share some additional information so that the board is fully informed. And I think most of this, Laurel, is yours, so I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent McIntyre. Slide those forward for me.
Yes.
2 more, please.
One more?
Thank you. Yep. So tonight, I'm going to talk about some of our key indicators related to staffing survey information that we've received, and staffing readiness. As I shared at our last board meeting, HR did survey our employees during the second week of July, and we received these results. The percent of the employees who were comfortable returning to work in a hybrid model was 56%, of which 45% had concerns. In-person was 34% with concerns. And in a distant learning model, 77% were comfortable, still with 47% with concerns. 22 of our respondents indicated that they had some condition that was considered high risk related to COVID-19. And as Joan moves us to the next slide, I'm going to talk through the results of that. We did reach out to all of those employees who asked us to reach out to them. There were over 500 employees that we reached out to. Of those 500 employees that said they had a high-risk condition, 279 did request to work remotely. Of those 279, 176 were teachers and 55 were ESPs. We will be able to accommodate most of our teachers into the Distance Learning Academy, and we'll be able to accommodate many of our Class 2 ESPs into that Distance Learning Academy. Staffing will be impacted at all of our sites, however, due to the Distance Learning Academy. We need to staff over 200 teachers into DLA. We've spent most of the day on Sunday, all day today, and we're coming back tomorrow to continue that staffing puzzle. And anybody who knows me knows that I love staffing, and this has been hard. This has been very challenging because we know we want the best people in front of our kids every day. And so we're taking people out of an environment in which they are very comfortable and then moving them into Distance Learning Academy. There may be some people who will be teaching at a different grade level starting in a week or 2. There may be teachers that are teaching in a different building, starting in a week or two. There may also be some staff who may have to teach in a content area for which they are not licensed in order to be able to accommodate their request to work remotely. So we have reached out to those employees and said, here are the options. You can either take a leave of absence, or we can get an out-of-field permission, and here's what you would teach. And we're having them make those decisions today and tomorrow. In addition, we know that we have people who are very, very solid in their content area and grade-specific content. So even if they are licensed, if I were asked to be teaching calculus right now, that would be very, very, very challenging. And yet I am licensed to teach calculus. I wouldn't be very good at it, but I could do it. So we are working to notify all of our employees by this Friday, the 28th, as to their staffing assignment. All of our schools are waiting for that information so that they can reschedule and restaff all the students in the building. It's a very, very complex puzzle. So delaying the start of the school year for 1 week until September 14th will allow us time for those staffing changes. More would be very helpful, but we are requesting 1 week till September 14th. We do have staff that may need to pack up their entire classroom and move and get ready to teach a new curriculum. So as we're thinking about all of those things, the gift of time would be absolutely essential. If we stay in a hybrid model, we also have to be having our teachers and our ESPs work in an environment for which they are not familiar. They have never taught in a hybrid model before. So that's just another component and a rationale for potentially continuing in a distance learning environment or starting in a distance learning environment. That extra week of time will also allow our staff to come into the building, to work collaboratively, to be trained on the safety plan. Our non-licensed staff normally do not start until the very first day of school. So they have not seen any of the safety plans and have not had the COVID training. This additional 4 days will give them the opportunity to do that. At this time, we also have 7 openings for our nurses. We have 3 openings for an RN at 3 of our sites. Interviews are taking place this week, and we hope to make offers either late this week or early next week. We also have what we call float nurses, and those are nurses that we can utilize to sub when there is a nurse that is out. We have 4 float positions. 1 is filled. We have 3 open float positions, and we have no applicants at this time. So moving into a distance learning environment with a delayed start would give us time to hire those nurses so that when students are back in session in person, we hope to be fully staffed with our nursing staff. Jen, if you'd move it to the next slide, please. As I talked about earlier, we did a survey of our substitutes. We have over 680 substitutes that have been active in the last year. Out of those substitutes, we have confirmed that 221 say they are comfortable and willing to sub in a hybrid environment. We also pulled the data for our substitutes, and over 1/5 of our substitutes are considered high risk based on age alone. So we are worried that we will not have enough substitutes for teaching positions when we come back into an in-person model. We are reaching out because we do have substitutes that did not respond to that survey. So we have that survey still open, and we are reaching out through our district email instead of a survey email to try to get more data from those substitutes so that we can determine who we really have ready to sub. As I talked about last time, we also know that we have a quarantine period. So 10 to 14 days, anytime there's an exposure. And we know that that growth is exponential. So as I think about the subs that we need on a regular basis, we have a shortage of subs regularly, this will compound the problem. In addition, I pulled our leave data. So we've had leaves related to COVID, and I pulled the data from April 1 to June 30th. We had 269 COVID-related leaves for a 90-day period. And then from July 1 to August 24th, which is a 54-day period, we had 258. So almost the same number of leaves in just over half the time related to COVID. If you'd go to the next slide, Joan. And then finally, as one of the strategies in HR, we have reached out to all of our employees and asked them to consider being an emergency substitute. And to be an emergency substitute, you have to have a bachelor's degree. We've had 44 of our current employees say yes, they are absolutely willing to be an emergency substitute, yet they are not yet licensed through PELSB. And so once they are licensed, we'll be able to pull them as their schedule allows to help support in the classroom when we're short subs. Employees that have volunteered to get that short call sub license have to submit their application to PELSB. They have to submit a transcript. They do have to get their fingerprints and their background checks done. And then there's an 8-hour training that we require to prepare our staff to be in the classroom. So that is why it takes that time period and why moving into a distance learning model to begin the school year would give us that grace of time. And finally, we are continuing to work with our labor leaders on labor agreements that would help us maximize staff flexibility and give some furlough language so that we wouldn't lose employees in whatever model that we're in. And when we are in person, we can maximize the use, particularly of our ESPs, where we need them for extra supervision and coverage to support our students. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Wilson. I think Sherry has to wipe down the mic.
And while Sherry's doing that, board members, I just wanted to extend a thank you to Kelly. He's getting tired of me calling him every day. And literally a daily conference call to continue to work together. As you just heard, a small part of the layers of details to work through. And I asked Kelly to share some key information about some data they've collected, also the experience their members are feeling with the staffing process and impact on student learning. But I just really want to thank Kelly to continuing to hang in there and working with our district leadership, because I think I'm not the only one calling him every day. And I know there's a hunger for information, and we're trying to get it to them as fast as we can, and it's never fast enough, right? So
I do appreciate the daily calls.
Yeah.
Even on Sunday, I just had to walk away from my wife and make sure
Yeah.
she wasn't there. I don't know if she appreciates, but I do. It has been very nice over the last 3 weeks to have increased communication, whether it's with Corey or Laurel, Anthony, anyone. It's nice because our members have a lot of questions, and every time we meet to try to answer questions, we just get more questions and not many answers. And as you know, I represent teachers, nurses, and Kid Stop instructors, 1,600 members. There isn't a whole lot that 1,600 people are going to agree on. We don't, you know, if I get a 50-50 day, I figure that's a win. But one thing that there's agreement on is we want to be back in classes. We want to be back in schools. We want to be back with our students when it is safe to do so. Education Minnesota surveyed members across the state in July, and we replicated that survey with our members in August. So in July, 437 Osseo members responded to the survey. And then when we redid it here, we had 698 of our members respond. And the question, I just have the first question that I brought, and there's a lot of other data also, but the first question was, how should education take place in the fall? The first choice was reopen and normal. And our members in July, 9% of them thought we should reopen as normal. And by August, that was down to 5%. Starting in the hybrid model, in July was 27%, and in August was 16%. Starting in distance learning, even in July was at 60% of our members thought that would be the best way, and in August it is now up to 77%. We had 4% in July who said another model, and 2% in August. And they just know they want another program. They don't have any ideas on what's going to work better, however. They just didn't like those two options. So I'm confident saying we want to open our schools. We want to be back with our colleagues and our kids as soon as we can, as long as it's safe. We want to bring students back into schools when it's safe too. We want to be back in our schools ourselves when it's safe. There are some other concerns that I have. Just, you know, when we're talking about getting an extended week, we're really talking about a 4-day process, 4 days that we'd be gaining in a 4-day week. I have come in on Labor Days before, but we aren't required to be in Labor Day. To get that full week, we'd have to do that. Right? So, and part of this is, you know, I'm going to repeat what Laurel just said because I want to make sure you understand. Today is Tuesday. They've worked Sunday and Tuesday to work on ADA accommodations, and they're going to come back tomorrow. And once those ADA accommodations, those staff members are placed, then the dominoes fall. And you couple how many of our staff members at each site are going to be leaving to go to Distance Learning Academy, and match that with the number of students who've left, and the dominoes at every site start to fall. And we might have to reduce sections, we might have to move around. It is Tuesday, and we've got a great number of staff who will find out on Friday that they aren't going to be working in the position that they thought. They might not be working at the site that they thought, or in the subject area or the grade level. On Friday, and we start Monday. Right? As Laurel also said, and I want to repeat it, they're going to have to pack up their rooms and move. I might have to learn a new grade level. I might have to learn new subject area. I might be teaching something that I'm not even licensed for, but due to my health concerns, I need to. This happened to me 30 years ago. We lost kids, didn't have kids, and so the first day of school, I covered a second grade class, and on the second day, I was not second grade anymore. I was teaching 5th grade the second day of school. Right? It's not easy, and it's not fun. But people, you know, want to be back. The packing, the moving, the learning, the trying to keep at least a day ahead of the kids when you're trying to teach something you don't know is going to be a lot of work for them. It happens every year, but this year we're looking at a lot more numbers than we typically have. That's a concern of mine. I don't think it's due to any lack of effort, but I'm also very concerned about the requirements to open in person, and will they or can they be met to bring people back in buildings? Right? We've got site plans that were just turned in. They need to be looked at and see if they are being followed, can be followed. PPE that needs to be, there's a lot of requirements, and Minnesota does have a lot of requirements to come back, and I'm thankful for that. But we have to make sure those requirements can be and are being met to bring people back into our schools. I think they can. I don't think we are there yet. Our members have been asking question after question after question about what the expectations are in a hybrid model. Because right now, I'm supposed to teach the 15 kids that are sitting in chairs in front of me, and also the 15 that are at home on distance learning. I am not telling one of our members they need to work 8 days in school, 8 hours, excuse me, and then go home and work some more for distance learning. They won't be teaching very long if that's the expectations. But there is no other answer yet. And again, I don't believe it's for lack of trying. There is no manual on how to deal with the pandemic. We're creating this, and we're going to need some more time. It also worries me if not only on staff, but on student learning, if we are switching in and out of models frequently. Right? I think if we were to start in hybrid, we go out, we come back and forth, all of those are going to cause disruptions to learning, to that flow. And that concerns me when we start talking about what students might have gotten or not gotten last spring, and what are we going to do about that this year. A couple of the board sessions when some of the instructional group talked, huge expectations for social, emotional, academics, our standards, lots of expectation, and there's still only 24 hours in a day. We can't burn everybody out. The anxiety level, the health concerns, all that is already so high. And that right there makes me lose sleep at night, and that's only one of the questions, and there's another 100 of them probably to go. And we just need time to find those answers, to decide what it is, and have a detailed plan, and we aren't there yet. Numbers, data, you know, I taught for 28 years at Zanewood and Crestview on the east side of our district. I understand their concerns. We are one district. Regardless of data, we shouldn't open up until we are ready to open up. Requirements meant, and details to the plan, and reasonable expectations for all of our staff. We have, or we should be learning from last spring. Those 3 months were an opportunity for us to learn. We can use our staff in a much more efficient and effective way, but we need the time to do so. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you,
So
Kelly.
before we move on to our next area, I just want to give a chance for some questions for especially Laurel, because there's a lot of complications with staffing, but know that you're going to get more detail about the instructional preparedness side from Kelly, Steve, and Michael coming up in our next section around both of the models we've been working at the building level with our building level leaders. But board members, here's a good spot to get some clarification on any of the staffing data you saw or information you received around this staffing topic.
All right, I'll go first this time because I usually never do. Laurel, you said that we have 221 subs and that you were concerned that we won't have enough out of a normal pool of 689. When will we have enough? Is it a month? Is it 2 months? Will we ever have enough in your estimation that we can open? Because it sounds like that is a consideration that we can't open because we don't have the subs.
So on any given year, I'm glad you asked that question, Mike. So we have 600 to 700 subs on any given year, and depending on the day of the week, depending on the season, whether it's flu season, we are short subs already. So no, I don't think we will ever have enough, but 1/3 of what we had last year is not going to suffice. So with our plans for the emergency subbing, plus trying to get more detailed information from our subs and get commitment, I also have Dante Williams out doing whatever he can to try to get and secure more subs, not only for our teaching positions, but our ESPs, our school nutrition, and our kids staff instructors. So I can't answer that, Mike, because I don't think we ever have enough subs. We are always asking teachers to do emergency subbing and cover on their prep time, and that's even more taxing for our staff.
Okay, thank you. Director Douglas, any questions?
I do, actually, to follow up to your questions. Thank you. The emergency subs, that is something that you've asked of staff that we already have. What about people in our community? Are those people eligible to be emergency subs as well?
Yes, so a short call sub license just requires a bachelor's degree. So absolutely, and that's part of what Dante does every year, is to go out to our communities, to some of the leaders within our community, and try to help people understand what subbing is and what the requirements are, and actually help them through the process. And I think more than ever now, we're gonna need to do that because a lot of it's virtual. And the response time at Pellsby, they're understaffed as well. So the more we can do to support our community members that want to get short call sub licenses, the more we need to do that.
Is there a way that we could send out, or have we already pushed information out into the community to, I guess, recruit people to participate in that?
Yeah, we've done Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, we have flyers, we have a spot on our website that, I have to check with Barb now that it's been retooled, but it was out there before. So, you know, if other people have great ideas or community members for which we can contact, we welcome that information.
So one of the things that you pointed out is the quarantine requirements. With that requirement, it seems next to impossible to keep classrooms open, period. If we have, you know, a handful of teachers that go out every day and have to be gone for 10 to 14 days, pretty soon we won't have any teachers. When we're in a distance learning model, or teachers who are participating in a distance learning model, if those teachers are tested positive but no longer symptomatic or experiencing symptoms which would prevent them from work, are they allowed to continue working, or are they forced to not work?
We, in fact, encourage them to continue working. Our plan right now is if they feel well enough, they absolutely will be required to continue working. If they aren't well enough, they would call in on absence management and we would secure support for that classroom, but absolutely, if they are well enough to continue working, we want them working.
One other question I had is about the quarantine. If a student, or I'm sorry, if a teacher has a close contact exposure and needs to get tested, tests positive, has no symptoms, are they allowed to continue working, or do they have to remain quarantined for the 10 days?
Yeah, we follow MDH guidelines, which talks about, we do trace tracking, and I think Superintendent McIntyre, I haven't done it before. It was my time.
Usually Tim's job.
Oh, sorry.
Not just me.
It's her birthday today, so sorry, it was on my mind.
Mine was yesterday.
I forgot where I was going.
We need to
yes,
sing?
we're going to follow MDH guidelines. So if there is close contact exposure, they will follow the guidelines for the 10 to 14 days quarantine. And we are having a district COVID team that will do that notification, that tracing, and follow what the guidelines of MDH are to communicate exactly what needs to happen. And then we'll let HR know, and then we'll follow our processes.
So a concern that I've heard from teachers is, what if I don't have, they're concerned about multiple exposures and being quarantined multiple times in a year and how that impacts their employment.
So the latest information from MDH is if you have been exposed and tested positive for COVID and you are exposed again, if it's within 90 days, you don't have to quarantine. If it's outside the 90 days, then you would have to do another quarantine period. If you are quarantining and we are able to have you continue to work remotely, you will continue to work. There's no sick leave, there's no time. If you are not able to work remotely, Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which is active through December 30th, allows for 2 weeks, 10 days of emergency sick leave that doesn't come out of a person's sick leave pool. So there is that opportunity as well.
Okay, thank you.
Director Dawson-Walton.
One of the things that kind of caught my attention was just the requirements to reopen. I don't know who to direct this to. And just that, I know each site have their own plans, but how are we going to ensure that they're being followed? Is there a protocol in place prior to the year to ensure that they're being followed?
Are you referring to the site level COVID safety plan? Is that what you mean, Director Dawson-Walton?
Yeah, just now I have a random question. It just says requirements, will the requirements be met to ensure, yes, that we have COVID protocols in place, And then, how are we ensuring that they're gonna be followed? When does that happen? Like, when are we gonna know we're gonna be ready to go?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to sort out right now, and I know, I don't know if Ron's out in the hallway too, because I'm sure he would love to weigh in on this, but I'll buy him some time.
I can wait,
I think one
Okay.
important statement that was made earlier is, please remember that for our ESPs, for example, they report the first day of
Right.
school. It's a big factor in why we want to delay the start, so we have even just those 4 days to train on the protocols, and every site's got about a 20-page plan that Ron can speak to. But this is one of the challenges we are facing, especially if you have lots of moving staff, how to ensure they are trained in their new role at their new building in that safety plan, on top of the instructional pieces we're getting into right now. So Ron,
Yeah,
I'm sure you can do better than that, but.
And I'm not sure exactly what the question was because I was coming down the hall, but essentially every single one of our sites is required to submit their site safety plan, and it is a template that our health and safety team has put together that's based on information from the Department of Health and from the Department of Education. And as part of that, it is then personalized to each of the sites. So the site leadership team has put together a team at each of the sites to then put together that plan and submit it to our health and safety department. And then our health and safety department will analyze each of those safety plans to determine whether or not it meets the requirements of the Department of Health and the Department of Ed, and then either approve them or send it back and say, here are the elements that you're missing or that you need to tweak. From there, then the plan is for our health safety team to go out to each of the sites before we bring students into the sites to ensure that the elements of that site safety plan are actually implemented. So some of the components might be signage in the building to promote social distancing, to look at the classrooms to ensure that the desks are spaced for social distancing. Those are just a couple of the examples that are included in that site safety plan. So our health safety team will ensure then that that site safety plan is implemented and ready for students. The other element to that then is that all staff in that building will be required to understand the elements of that site safety plan so that they're ready to implement it at each part of the building. So every staff person would be required to understand that, as well as go through some district-wide training that we have for each staff member. And some of that training includes some of the chemicals that we are asking our staff members to help us with sanitation, with some of those first point of contact areas, those regular contacts, desktops, doorknobs, things like that, in coordination and partnership with our custodial team. Does that answer the question?
Wasn't my
Yes.
question.
Great.
Wait,
Oh.
well, I have it here. This is not part of the presentation, I believe, but I did have a question. I've had a couple questions. And I know we covered it last time a little bit around our nutrition services. And depending the model we go, does it change? I mean, this summer or since distance learning, it was free, and now we're going into a school year. And so what does that look like? Does it change under each of the models?
Yep, so it does change depending on the model that we're in for all three of the models. So for hybrid, as we've talked about before, it's really a combination because we need to make sure that we're providing meals for our students that are in the building, as well as those that are either the off days that they're not in the buildings and our Distance Learning Academy students. And so we have a structure that we have planned out for being able to offer those meals, a combination of in the building as well as curbside, and then also a delivery option that we would deliver a week's worth of meals to those Distance Learning Academy students. If we're in a distance learning model, it changes because then we've got to make sure that we have meals available for all students and make it as accessible as possible for those families to be able to either pick them up or to have it delivered to them. So we're working through some of those components right now to better understand how do we be as customer-friendly and give options for our families to be able to come curbside, to be able to pick those up each day, breakfast and lunches, as well as to deliver those using our transportation system again, as we did this past spring. In terms of the cost for those meals, last spring the USDA came and said essentially that when all of schools really across the country went to a distance learning model, they essentially gave a waiver. So we were able to offer free meals to all students as they presented themselves to one of our sites or as we delivered them to their homes. That waiver really expires. They kept extending it, but it expires here at the end of August. And so starting in September, as we either bring students back or as if we are in a distance learning model, then we will have to go through the traditional way, whether it's if families qualify for free and reduced, then they would continue to be given meals for free. And if they're full paid, then we would have to charge them for those meals.
All right.
All right, thank you. Director Simons, do you have any questions for either Laurel or?
Going back to the staffing component, so my question is, are we assuming the same staffing ratios in a distance environment versus in person, or have we thought innovatively or creatively on how we could work that differently so that we can free up more teachers to be available for a hybrid situation?
And that is the work of our Department of Teaching and Leadership, but we are assuming the same staffing ratios. So class sizes for elementary, we have our bands, and we are making that same assumption for our distance learning academy. At the secondary, we have a ratio of around 32, 33 per one teacher, and we are assuming that same staffing model at the distance learning academy. Some of the support staff that we have at some of our buildings will not be needed in distance learning academy, so we won't be staffing those allocations there.
Do you believe it's an option to do that differently?
You mean like increase the class size?
Yeah, in a remote environment, it sounds like we're taking a brick and mortar approach and putting that into distance learning. I'm just saying that maybe there's other options. Have you explored other options?
We haven't explored other options. I've been an online distance virtual teacher for over 10 years, and I've had 33 students in my class, and it is extremely busy and taxing to try to support students virtually, because it's much easier to have a face-to-face conversation in real time. And we don't necessarily have that opportunity, or somebody's logging on at a later time and you don't get that face-to-face conversation. It takes more time. So I would not be advocating just personally to have an increased class size just because it's a distance learning environment, because the amount of work that it takes is equal to or greater than in a classroom environment, in my belief.
Okay, that's good clarification. In terms of safety and readiness, in terms of what's determined a safe environment, the state of Minnesota, the Department of Education and Public Health have set those parameters where I don't feel are at liberty to take a different stance, I guess. The state is setting those parameters. I guess I'm seeking to understand Kelly's comments that are those not, is the feeling that those parameters set by the state are not sufficient, I guess? Because there's two pieces. Are the safety parameters established by the state the right level and what people are comfortable with? And number two, certainly executing them. Because if we can't execute what we've said are the safety measures, that's a whole different question. Certainly we can't allow people to return to an environment that we can't implement safety measures in. So I just want to understand that a little bit more.
Kelly, you gotta go up to the mic, because it's
Sorry.
recorded, thank you. Make you walk some more.
Thank you. I think there's been a lot of effort into talking through and trying to plan these all. So I don't think it's a lack of effort, but they're high standards. They need to be high standards, and they need to be in place. I don't think we are there yet.
Okay, thank
And
you.
that's That's my opinion only. I've not been out and seen the HVAC. I've been in schools for a long time though, and know what some of our systems are like, and some of them have been upgraded and some of them haven't. It worries me when at some sites they say the 6 feet distancing is just if you can, and it's not, it's a requirement. If we can't do it, we shouldn't be opening. So I just don't think we're there yet.
Okay,
And I don't think we should be back until we are there.
okay, thank you, that's good clarification. That's all.
Thank you. Director Mosqueda-Jones, did I already ask you? I forgot.
I don't have any questions about the staffing.
Okay. With that, we
Okay.
can continue to move on.
Thank you, Chair Ostafi. So, great questions. Thank you for taking the time to let us ask or answer them as best we can. The next section, I'm going to ask Steve and Kelly and Michael to come in. Since our last meeting, what we've been able to do is go deeper at the site level on implications for hybrid and distance learning when it comes to looking at the benefits, the challenges, and the critical data at the elementary and secondary levels as when we think of implementation, right? So, Steve, I think you're going to start with elementary.
I am.
Yep, thank you.
So, good evening, everyone. As Corey said, part of what I'd like to just share with you, and I think we've shared before, is just the work that's been going on at the school level, at the elementary level. So a lot of effort has gone into, when we talk about the hybrid model, just this notion of the A, B days and the amount of work and effort it takes to put that together. And so I can't underscore enough logistically how that's been a challenge for our schools, as they've had to coordinate that across not only with the elementary schools, but with our high schools and middle schools, all again with this intent for us to keep the sibling preference in order. So that has been going on in earnest. I know I've shared several times in terms of the structure of the model. So with the Group A attending Monday and Wednesday, Group B attending Tuesday and Thursday, and the Friday being that time for staff to plan, collaborate, and create digital content, because we know that's going to be an important aspect of the work that needs to get done moving forward. Also, Ron talked about some of the timing for cleaning and the meals delivery and all that sort of working in concert. So again, the A-B was a major step that needed to happen, and so that's been progressing. But again, that's how our leaders have been focused, where their energy has been. I think you heard pretty clearly from our principals, and we do have some of our principals here tonight as well to potentially answer some of your questions. But we know that, or we believe that the hybrid model would allow for that face-to-face instructional relationship building that we all crave. We also know it would provide those opportunities to intervene with students who are struggling. And then, of course, begin to address some of the social emotional issues or challenges that our students and staff, I'm sure, are going to be facing as they return. Corey talked about the challenges. So as we've been immersing ourselves in it, one of the biggest challenges is this is new. This is brand new for everyone. And so as time, the benefit of time would certainly assist us with really unpacking the hybrid at our different sites. We do know some of the impact. I know you've heard of it, so I'm not going to repeat all of it. But again, our concerns being the logistics of staff falling ill. What would that mean in terms of quarantine? Issues that fall around space. Also, too, some of the challenges that we're going to face with our elective courses and the assigning, excuse me, the assigning of teachers to those courses, and just the domino effect that this could potentially have in our schools if there are some COVID, if and when there are some COVID outbreaks. Laurel, I think, spent a lot of time on this, so I won't spend too much on just the whole notion of the lack of substitute coverage that we're going to be facing, and just the, as I mentioned, the need for being able to be nimble within those buildings and be able to move within that space. Some of the critical data again, is the fact that we have so many teachers and ESPs who have requested to work remotely. And so, you know, as what's happened this weekend and what happened today, we're in the midst of really figuring out what that staffing is going to look like and that impact that it's going to have. And we do, as we're paying attention, I'm sure you are seeing that, we're seeing that impact, especially for some of our 15 through 24-year-old students, the impact that it's having on those students with the information from the Department of Health, and just again how that may impact our secondary schools. So again, a lot of work and effort has been going into this, and I'm going to turn it over at this point to Kelly for distance.
Good evening. I'm here to talk about the Distance Learning Plus model. So as Steve just got done going through the whole hybrid piece, so I'm going to give a brief description. And again, I know that you've heard this often, so I'll just go through it quickly, of the distance learning model. So there's 5 days of distance learning. There's also the potential for in-person learning for some of our self-contained special ed and some of our select EL students. The distance learning model schedules will be clearly articulated, communicated, and followed. And distance learning will provide full access to all grade levels and subject content areas that will be provided via a balanced approach. So that could be live sessions with the teacher, digital connections, flipped learning video content, and then school and district provided materials. So what are the benefits of the Distance Learning Plus model? Well, it offers maximum protection from the potential COVID exposure. We've heard a lot about the safety of our staff and students, and so I'm going to repeat that again because it cannot be underscored enough, that it offers the maximum protection for COVID exposure. Secondary students will have greater access to course offerings. When we go in a distance learning model, the students will have the courses for which they tallied. Staff will have regularly scheduled access to the building. This would be something different from the spring. They'll have regularly access to the building in order to accomplish their work as is permitted through the MDH guidelines. Starting in distance learning will allow teachers and leaders to better operationalize the hybrid model. This is a model they've never ever taught under. There's a lot of concern from teachers about how they will be able to teach. For example, if you're an A student, how will they teach the A student in person while also teaching the B student remotely, all at the same time on any given day? So there's questions and wonderings about that. Starting in distance learning will give teachers more time to operationalize those pieces. Starting in distance learning will provide critical time for schools to safely prepare their buildings. Again, we just had Ron talk about that and others speak to that. And it's not that the buildings are not going to be safely prepared as of September 14th regardless, but it is one thing right now that would allow principals to take something off of their plate for a little bit of time to focus on getting those master schedules done and other really critically important pieces that must be done right now. Once those pieces are in place, going to distance learning would allow them to have more time to really make sure, not just that all the COVID safety pieces are in place, but to reflect and make changes if necessary. So we want them to walk their buildings. We want them to live in those spaces. We want them to then say, you know, would it be better if we changed this hallway to this pathway? And can they get it done? Yes. Would it be better if they had time to reflect on it? Absolutely. And the distance learning model would give them that time. Starting in distance learning would help mitigate some of the negative impact that the completion of the DLA staffing process will have on schools. We spent all day again today working on the DLA staffing, so the schools are patiently waiting to to see which staff are going to be pulled out of their buildings so they can then start to build a master schedule. It is a very, very, very complex process. Learning spaces and capacity will not be an issue if we go in distance learning, if we have to shut down classrooms because of COVID exposure and those classes have to be relocated. Learning spaces are certainly going to become a challenge and certainly will become an issue, but they will not if we're in distance learning. It allows for the opportunity to bring additional students in for in-person learning, as we spoke about. So some of our self-contained special ed students and select EL students. There would be no substitute shortage. Quarantining will not be a factor if the staff can still work remotely, and Laurel already spoke to that as well. Precautionary safety measures, such as the social distancing and all the other safety measures, will not need to be maintained. When you think of a school the size of Maple Grove Senior High, for example, they could still easily have 1,000 or more students in their building on any A or B day. So that still could be about 300 students every lunch. Those students have to be in line for lunch, for example, 6 feet apart from each other. So the social distancing becomes a huge factor for those large buildings. There will not need to be any additional classrooms for isolating staff or students during the day. It would limit the amount of the additional cleaning that would need to occur. And as Laurel talked about, we'd have more time to hire additional staff like float nurses that we're going to need to support the hybrid model. The challenges to distance learning are no face-to-face interactions. So there's more difficulty in establishing those relationships. There's less ability to meet the social emotional needs of students. We still believe that we have really creative ways to meet those needs, certainly, but less ability to do so. Not that we can't, though. And then, of course, one of the challenges is, working to debunk some of the existing beliefs around distance learning based on last March social or spring implementation. And the critical data would just be the exact same that Steve had gone through on the previous hybrid slide. So 2 slides ago, if you can see on Granicus, or we could have Joan put it up. And that's it. Michael?
Thank you, Sherry. Joan, a couple slides, one more, please. Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Distance Learning Plus, some of the technical elements of Distance Learning Plus. So here's what we know to be true, that we absolutely need a quality launch to the school year. The traditional first week schedule would allow 4 days, and Kelly talked to this a little bit, but 4 additional days, suggesting that we have a late start. It would provide 4 additional days for professional development and teacher preparation for the implementation of the learning model that has been necessitated by the COVID-19 outbreak. September 8th through 11th will be focused on staff training, staff preparation for new courses, as we heard from Laurel this evening, that there's some opportunities or potential that our educational staff will be teaching different courses. And not only that, but also at new grade levels. We'll also have COVID training, which you heard Ron speak about, and opportunities for staff to collaborate a bit more deeper within their potentially new content areas. Will the building be accessible? One of the things that many of you remember last year as on the onset of the COVID outbreak, that we shut down the buildings. With this model, the Distance Learning Plus, staff, educators will have access to the buildings to make sure that they can deliver the meaningful content that we're committed to doing so. The instructional design, the Distance Learning Plus will provide full access to all grade level subject and content areas via a balanced approach, which includes live digital connections, flipped learning video content, and school and district provided materials, synchronous and asynchronous learning. That's one of the pieces that were potentially one of the gaps that we had in the spring. So this is an opportunity for us to be reflective about what our practice has been and make our commitment to our community to elevate our practice to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our learners in an equitable manner. During the summer, the schedule, what we learned from some of our summer work groups is that the distance learning model encouraged more synchronous and asynchronous learning. We heard that from some of our educators and obviously some of our principals as well. How can we make sure that there's the relational component? We talked about social and emotional learning. The opportunity to have some face time and to make sure that we can foster that excellence is going to be critically important. Online practices, another learning, and so I hope you hear this theme about what we've learned and how we elevated our practice, that we've really honed in and really wanted to streamline what this experience is going to be, not only for our scholars, but also for our parents. So what we did is we looked at the Seesaw platform, K through 5 classrooms, and Schoology platform, 6 through 12. So it's going to be critically important that we are in relationship with our families and our communities to make sure that they know how to access. And that's one of the pieces that we're looking at backpacks and make sure that we're almost providing PD for families to make sure that they can access and be in community with us towards the excellence and the brilliance of their young people. Finally, student supports. There's going to be learning cohorts. We know that some of our most vulnerable scholars did not fare well in the spring, and we'd be remiss if we weren't honest about that and we didn't call to attention to that. Now that we know better, we can do better, and that's what our commitment ultimately is. So we're going to look at opportunities to bring not only our special education scholars into the building, but also our EL scholars into the building. We know that, again, a large portion of our EL scholars did not fare well. It's our job to provide meaningful, enriched education, and to be candid, we miss some opportunities, and we want to make sure that we don't miss that, and that's this plus that we're looking at. And finally, so mental health services is another element that we're going to be mindful of with this Distant Learning Plus, check and connect, and then therapy. What are some of the therapy needs? We know that COVID, the death of George Floyd, what we're seeing in Wisconsin has profound impacts in our community. We know that we're going to have to be champions around the emotional health of our communities. And finally, Distance Learning Plus will adhere to the same height standard designed to be rigorous and engaging. It will be staffed by the same dedicated and extremely qualified Osseo educators. Our unwavering commitment remains that every day we will work hard to fulfill our mission to create learning, growth, and connection opportunities for our brilliant scholars of Osseo area schools. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Anthony.
Yeah, so board members, before we get to some questions on the instructional preparedness, I want Anthony Paternos to give you a little additional information on just the considerations around Distance Learning Academy before we open it up for some of your questions for our team.
Good evening, everyone. So I want to speak tonight about some of the considerations to think about as we're working on building this Distance Learning Academy out. So you've heard at other work sessions, we have approximately 5,000 students enrolled in the Distance Learning Academy K through 12, which in many sense is larger than many school districts in the state of Minnesota. So we are essentially building from ground zero a new school district K through 12 programming. As we go through this process, you've heard from Laurel today that we have to staff this with over 200 teachers, moving them from different schools, different content areas, different grade levels, in order to meet all the expectations and requirements to deliver a high-quality program. As we think about this, that causes a domino effect, as you've heard from others. Moving those staff out of sites now means that we have to backfill within sites those positions and collapse sections and rechange schedules, which causes us to have to reschedule all 21,000 of our students at our physical sites and our Distance Learning Academy. If you think about master schedule building, typically that takes about 3 months. We've got April, May, and June that our sites go through master schedule building, and then it takes another approximately 3 weeks to put all the students into schedules and assign teachers to rosters. We've been doing that in a relatively short, crunched time, but it takes time. That's just the reality of the process to navigate, in particular, 5,000 students in the Distance Learning Academy, and then our other 20 or 15-ish thousand students at our physical sites as we continue to move forward. As you have also heard, many of our teachers will have completely new teaching assignments in our physical sites and the Distance Learning Academy, and that takes time and transition as you're going through that process. So as we think about helping teachers to build capacity and consistency, a distance learning model is a model that teachers have taught in, and they're not trying to teach and doing to an in-person and a remote setting at the same time to get comfortable with new content as they're navigating a transition at the beginning of the school year. Next slide, please. There are some great advantages around the work we've done in the Distance Learning Academy. So we've had over 7 meetings in the last 4 weeks to really dig down deep into structures and organization and frameworks for how the Distant Learning Academy is going to look. We've built out daily schedules, weekly schedules, how we're going to break down those different content blocks within the elementary level. What does the actual instructional design look like at the secondary level? Building in, as Michael talked about, synchronous and asynchronous learning within that framework. We have provided or developed a very robust opportunity or a framework around distance learning within that academy that could be replicated across all our sites. So it'd be very easy to take the work that we've done and then move it forward at our sites to start with a distance learning space. Last Thursday, we've had over 30 of our teachers from elementary and secondary participate in a consultation session around the Distance Learning Academy to dig down deep into the instructional framework, the instructional pedagogy, and the school schedule and how we would deliver that synchronous and asynchronous learning. We got a lot of great feedback and have had a lot of great collaboration since with Kelly Wilson and EMO to really hone in on that structure and make sure we have a solid learning opportunity for our families and our students and our staff to set them up for success as we move forward. The other piece that I would share around having that structure in place, and I alluded to it a little bit, is thinking about if we go forward with a distance learning opportunity across our district, it allows time for teachers to get familiar in that content, but also to process through what it would look like in a hybrid model to do in-person and remote instruction simultaneously. So we've had a lot of conversation at past meetings about the concept of flipped instruction and what that would look like. Flipped instruction takes time. It takes a lot of training to do that, and it takes a lot of time to build content, both the in-person content and the remote content for recording videos. As you heard from, Kelly, as he mentioned, trying to keep abreast of, staying a day ahead of the students. Thinking about that in a hybrid scenario while teachers are trying to teach in a flipped concept means they're going to have to be trying to create videos a day to 2 days in advance to get those posted. So there's opportunity with getting comfortable in that distance learning environment, building out digital content and having the time to build that digital content out with some space and time that will allow them to build a robust opportunity for a quality hybrid learning experience when we are ready to move into that model. Those are the comments I have for tonight. Thank you.
So Chair Ostafi, this would be a good opportunity for board members to ask any questions of any of our 4 leaders that just presented.
Okay. Jackie, I hate to do this to you, but I'm going to you first on this one.
Okay, well, I have a question for Anthony, Sherry, if you want to just wait. I just thought I'd maybe save you one time of doing that. Maybe this isn't just for you. I just want to know, are we planning on using the same schedule that DLA has for if we do Distance Learning Plus?
Yes, our plan around the building and construction with the core planning team for Distance Learning Academy was to build a model that could be replicated across all our sites. And some of the advantages of that is, if you think about the Fridays, which is, it replicates itself somewhat in the distance learning model as it does within the hybrid for that opportunity for PLCs and collaboration. Part of that is intentionally built, so teachers in the Distance Learning Academy can collaborate with their colleagues across our system. As well as we think about support resources. If we have a different structure of distance learning at our sites as we would within the Distance Learning Academy, we have only so many district level support staff in teaching and learning and in technology to really help teachers be effective. So as we think about the daily schedule and the structures, we're trying to mirror as much as we can possibly, that if we're in distance learning as a district, that would mirror what we have in the Distance Learning Academy as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm just concerned, okay, so I'm a teacher, right? Which I have to say every meeting apparently. And I'm trying to conceptualize how all this content's going to be created. And is teaching and learning gonna have some? Are we gonna have teachers be able to develop some outside of their time and get paid for it? I'm just trying to figure out how because last spring, I spent 13, 14 hours a day creating content and teaching online. I'm just trying to conceptualize even, whatever model we go into, how are we gonna do that?
Yep, I'm going to let some of the others speak to that too, but, conceptually, that's part of the conversation and why, we're having those conversations about starting later, because that's going to give additional time for teachers to engage and collaborate and start to build that content and understand the subject area that they're working in, as well as when we look at the structures of the models with distance learning or the Distance Learning Academy, building in that space and time. So, traditionally, if you think about that 20 minutes before and after school that has bus duty or hall duty or supervision duty, not that there won't be necessarily some meetings or other duties, but there's additional time that, isn't used for other duties that typically would show up in a brick and mortar setting. As well as when we look at some of the additional structures with that Friday, having space carved out for teachers to build content, collaborate with each other to build content as well. The secondary level, we're looking at it's a block schedule essentially, where 3 of the 6 courses would be taught each day in a live synchronous session. And the way the structure with teachers would be is every other day on Monday through Friday, they would have an 80-minute chunk of time dedicated to just preparation, planning, content building as well within that structure. Elementary, we've got a built-in structure where they've got daily time to, again, dedicated to them to build content and navigate the preparation for what they need for content delivery, as well as extended time on Fridays, as was already mentioned. Teaching and learning, and I'll turn it over to this team, but I know they've been planning through a lot of things as well around this.
Thank you. I'd just add a couple things. There obviously is no easy answer to that, and we understand that the greatest work is going to be happening at the site levels. But the teaching and learning has been working closely in developing templates for our teachers, for our PLTs, so they can really dig into the essential learnings that I know we've talked about, and you heard from the principals. So it's really a matter of scale and how we're going to be able to really support all those sites, simultaneously. So learning and achievement leaders are part of those conversations. And I just also want to remind you what's nice about this is that the work that happened this summer really has helped inform the DLA. But the work that's happening in the DLA is really informing that next level of work that has to happen. And so as Anthony said, we're working together, sharing this information and really attempting to, get as much as we can into the hands of our school leaders so that teachers understand and principals understand what the expectations are and the possibilities. So they're going to be looking at any way that they can to really kind of streamline and support our teachers in that. So I don't know if there's anything.
So what I'm hearing is that whether we're in hybrid or distance learning, there's time on Fridays for planning.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think, and the other exciting part about that is that Anthony shared, the opportunity for, even in the hybrid, the DLA to be able to be collaborating
Right.
in some form or fashion, because we know many hands make lighter work.
And so if we're in hybrid, when does the teacher do their planning?
Well,
one of the things we're still trying to figure out?
Yeah, so part of our conversations right now And what I can share with you is our goal is to get as much preparation time as possible. So that's part of our work that we're going to be with Kelly and, certainly with HR. But the idea is that there's going to be, preparation time during the week in addition to a significant chunk on those Fridays.
So teachers will be able to have their duty-free lunch, et cetera.
They're going to have lunch, yeah.
Okay. I'm just picturing my life with
No, I
four-year-olds and
understand.
when that's
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
happen.
Lunch and bathroom breaks.
Okay.
That's our goal, so.
I do have a question about the cleaning materials. I know that's weird, but is that a Ron thing? I'll say that for later. The cleaning materials that we have to use in our district is toxic to me. I just can't breathe when it's around, so I'm a little worried about that. I think that's all I have for right now.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go. We had some questions, or there was some comment that the Distance Learning Plus model will give greater access to course offerings. Compared to hybrid, I thought we would switch back and forth between those two seamlessly, so I'm not sure about how that is a benefit. I'm just confused. So will we switch, will we keep the same exact courses and the same exact schedule between DL Plus and hybrid and then in full, or are we changing the schedules? And it just comes off of your bullets here.
No, I believe the intention is to keep the continuity as much as possible.
Okay, I'm just, if they're teaching hybrid or remote, those same staff would be the ones who would then go to hybrid, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
So
so
they're
there
teaching
really
the
shouldn't
AD
be any
days.
difference in course selection
Well,
between the two.
Can I
Okay,
jump in there, and Kelly, you might be able to help here, but the implication is, how many staff do we gotta move? And do we have the licensure areas to offer courses if we move staff to DLA, right?
That's exactly
So if you move, with the DLA, program and having to backfill those positions at the sites, we may not be able to offer the same number of courses at the sites. Whereas if we're in distance learning, teachers are teaching what their schedule they've, are licensed for probably to a greater degree. But I'm asking as a question, I guess, to clarify.
Right, so it's more complex because we have to take out the Distance Learning Academy
wait,
teachers.
before we go to, I think you may have misunderstood, so I
No,
just want to
okay.
be more clear. We said that the Distance Learning Plus had a benefit of having greater course offerings than hybrid. So how do you explain that, since we're going to go between the two and theoretically shortly, hopefully? So how does DL Plus, when you go to hybrid, are we taking kids out of courses in the middle of a try? I'm just, the comment that was made on here suggests that.
Yes.
So not Distance Learning Academy, DL Plus.
Nope, I see it. I see exactly which one you're talking about.
Okay.
And this came out of the work of the Steve's core instructional group. So I don't know the exact specifics around it. But what I would say is I don't think that it's in comparison to hybrid necessarily, but it's that when we run a distance learning, so academy, so when we say benefits of the model, this wasn't comparing it against others. It was the benefit of this model. And when you run a distance learning model, just like we did last spring, all the students get the courses for which they tallied. That's going to continue to occur if you run the distance learning model. Now, what you said about the hybrid would be true as well, except when you do the distance learning model, the delivery will be all in the same mechanism. I mean, they're not going to have half remote and half in person, so they won't have to juggle between two modalities of instruction or teaching and learning. And so it's not necessarily probably the course offerings as it's worded, but more the manner in which that it's being taught.
Okay. You mentioned that there would be no sub-shortage in the DL plus model. I mean, obviously, if there's issues around sickness or other things, yes, you can teach sick, but if you're sick and you can't teach, we're still at a third. So how does that address that issue of the 60% reduction in current subs?
Well, the belief, and even when they surveyed the substitutes, is that they feel more comfortable subbing in a distance learning format than they would in person. So there's going to be more subs accessible if we need them than there would if we're in-person learning and teaching.
Okay. You mentioned live synchronous sessions in DL plus. And I thought we had a significant concern last year that we couldn't get all of our students to be present in a typical schedule when they're at home and they're having to take care of younger siblings, or they have to do whatever. But the biggest concern was that we had kids who could not do synchronous, so we had to allow for the asynchronous. So how does DL Plus solve that issue with students who have to be home and take care of others?
So, you know, if we look at the DL Plus, which would mirror what the Distance Learning Academy has, some of the feedback we got from families was looking for a greater structure during the day. So that is what we are building. We are building an elementary, middle, and high school that has greater structure. There's going to be some degree of flexibility and independent learning that occurs with any online learning, whether it's Distance Learning Plus or the Distance Learning Academy. So the synchronous live instruction, and I'll use high school for example. So we're going to run a 3-block, it's a 4-block day. First 3 blocks would be, let's say, periods 1, 2, and 3 classes on Monday. On Tuesday would be periods 4, 5, and 6 would have live instruction. 4th block of the day would be an independent work day for them to check in remotely, digitally to their other 3 periods with a 20-minute segment, maybe watch a flip video, reading some content. Within an 80-minute block segment, a teacher might provide a 20-minute live lesson, and while they provide that 20-minute live lesson, they would also record it, post it in Schoology, so if there was an instance where a student couldn't attend synchronously, they would still have access to that in an asynchronous mode. So that's how we're going to look at building in the flexibility that provides some asynchronous, but is done through a synchronous format within the model. Similar structure would be at the elementary. So we're looking at 50-minute block segments. Again, within one 50-minute block, there might be a 15-minute mini lesson that's live. And then, you know, students would go break out into small groups or do something independently, come back in 20, 30 minutes for another check-in. Again, it varies based on the grade level. Kindergarten, 1st and 2nd might look very different than the way 4th and 5th check in within those different blocks. Again, as mini lessons are provided synchronously, they would get recorded and posted so that there would be access in an asynchronous format at a later point in time if needed with the teacher.
Okay. And I had one more question, and I will yield. But we talked about the site plans, that going to DL Plus would allow teachers to get more familiar with the site plans. So, and it was in here about the Distance Learning Academy considerations. And I don't know if you meant Distance Learning Plus or Distance Learning Academy, because if you're in the Distance Learning Academy, why would teachers need to understand the site plans? Unless they're being encouraged to use the buildings for their classrooms for instruction. Is that true or not?
No, this was only around Distance Learning Plus. Which one are you referencing?
I think I'm on number 32, which said, again, I'm pretty blind on
What is this
four number font, but
well, while you're looking, I'm gonna
can't
elaborate
see
too
it.
on the no substitute thing. So, as we're trying to find the slide, do you know what slide is 32? Joan, are they numbered on yours?
Distance Learning Academy considerations.
considerations.
Anyway, Mike, one of the other things I was gonna touch upon while we're looking, oh, these are academy questions. Okay. But about the substitutes is, this is another really important point to remember, is that if a teacher has to be quarantined for 10 days or 14 days, that teacher may not be experiencing any illness from the COVID testing positive, for example, but they're still not available to come in and work in a hybrid model, nor in an in-person model. So that's why the other piece about not having the substitute shortage. If they're distance learning, they can still be teaching their students instead of having to quarantine for those 10 or 14 days. But this specific question is for the Learning Academy.
So that specific question is in reference to Distance Learning Plus. So if we're in the Distance Learning Plus and replicating the Distance Learning Academy model for that, it would allow teachers more time around the understanding of the site plan and preparation for the site plan. Now, what I will say is we will potentially have some staff that are in sites and teaching in the Distance Learning Academy when we talk specifically around some of our support staff, some of our potentially some of our very unique course offerings at the secondary level where we have enough students tallied. We might, have staff that are teaching majority of their time in a physical site, also teaching a section within that Distance Learning Academy. So again, opportunity for those particular staff to have familiarity with their site plans.
All right, thank you. Director Simons?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood. For the Distance Learning Academy, the teachers are coming out of the sites, whether we're in distance or in hybrid, right?
Correct.
So you have the same issue of moving people around and teaching different things either way, right? That's
Yep.
not a difference.
The shifting of staff and the staffing is not a product of going to Distance Learning Plus or hybrid. That's a reality of what we have to do. We have to move those 200 staff members and we have to restaff all the sites and rebuild all the schedules. The same thing goes with you're moving 5,000 students out of our physical sites. So we have some sites that are now overstaffed and oversectioned based on how we plan things in the spring. And so we need to rebalance and reallocate based on that.
The difference is that if you're moving those teachers and we're starting in distance learning, those teachers will have much more time to get their personal belongings, their classrooms moved, their other things moved if they're moved to another building or another classroom. That will only happen if they're if they're in distance, they'll be able to have time to go over there and do that. If we're in a hybrid, they have to have that all done by the very first day of school because they have to be in their new building. They have to be in their new classroom.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, does delaying hybrid and starting in distance learning actually increase our instructional readiness? And if not, how much, and either way, how much time, how many weeks would you say is required in order for us to feel good about instructional readiness?
Well, I'll run at that one.
Ron, Corey.
Well, it's important to this decision. It's not.
It is.
It is.
It's a great question. And I fall back on teachers out of licensure, out of content, out of grade level, getting comfortable with those new roles, even if they have the licensure.
Right.
And that doesn't happen in a week or two.
Yeah.
Anthony gave an example of 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon. That's 40 minutes per day, 200 minutes a week. Over the course of a month, that's 13 hours. That's not a lot of time for a teacher to get ready to teach a new course, a new grade, a new school, all those kinds of things. So it's an element of time in my mind. And so a week isn't enough. 2 weeks aren't enough. And also just setting a target where we can hopefully realistically maybe come back to this, because I think Kelly said it so well, we aspire to have our kids and staff back in the buildings. What's the target that makes sense? That's our first natural break in the calendar to give us that kind of sense of time to hopefully restart in that hybrid model and have sufficient enough time to have that quality of instruction there. Kelly talked about the logistics of moving your stuff, but I'm more worried about time in so many staff maybe teaching in a new situation and being ready to do that and partnering with their new teammates in those collaboration days. So that's my personal opinion on why it's so critical, along with all the safety pieces we've talked about, because I don't want to forget about those.
Okay, so to be clear, the decision is going to be on the agenda here before us to start in distance learning or to start in hybrid along with a week delay. What I'm hearing though is that there's not, as far as my decision-making process, instructional readiness doesn't change under those two options. Or maybe I can wait till we get a little further and ask that question.
Two options meaning hybrid or
Hybrid versus
distance?
distance learning start.
So-
There's not an instructional benefit to
I'm-
one or the
I
other.
ju- I hope I just was trying to articulate the additional month, gives teachers that time of 4 weeks to be ready to teach in hybrid in those new areas they have to teach in.
Can I?
Unless I'm
They
misunderstanding
have
your
to
question.
start in distance learning and they're teaching different things. So how are they more ready instructionally if they're teaching things they haven't taught before in distance learning? That's my question.
Because
It's
you're not
okay if there's not
teaching
an
two
answer.
different,
Okay.
because you're not teaching two different things at one time with distance learning.
Right.
With hybrid, you're teaching two different ways. Teaching in person isn't like it used to be.
So
So that's a whole different way of planning, and distance is a whole different way of planning.
the modality
Right.
creates more efficiency for the teacher, but they're not more or less equipped to teach in a different subject matter area.
Well, having more time will make them better equipped and more equipped. Because when you teach in the hybrid model, you're teaching, think of an A student. If Kelsey's an A student and she's in the class on Monday, and I'm a B student, I'm at home on the day Kelsey's there, the teacher still has to provide that instruction. So unlike the distance learning, the teacher does not provide that asynchronous, synchronous learning. So if we're in a distance learning, that gives teachers the opportunity, and again, it's going to be a lot of work either way, but it gives them the opportunity to better prepare for the hybrid model. Because in the hybrid model, they're going to be doing both simultaneously. They're going to be teaching the students that are sitting in front of them, and then the other half of the students that are at home on any given day. So that is a model no teacher has ever taught under. And so that's something that we have heard from teachers, that they need a lot more time to get ready and plan and prep for that. Distance, instead of just starting right off the bat going into hybrid learning, distance learning at least is going to give some of that time and space between the students being right back in front of the teachers for them to be able to connect with others and plan and develop around the hybrid teaching model, which, as Jackie was saying as well, nobody has taught in that model. So what we've heard over and over is, how do I teach in person and how do I teach remote?
Which is going to be a question whether it's delayed or not, and sounds like a significant challenge.
The hybrid is a significant challenge around that, yes. But that, at least that would give them some time, in addition to that first week of school, more time to prepare for that.
Are we far enough down the path to understand what type of ideas we have to make that more efficient? Because again, I keep kind of hearing sort of brick and mortar assumptions placed on other options. I want to understand, shouldn't we be looking for ways to make that more efficient? Like, it seems confusing to me why the whole hybrid, if I feel like there could be different ways, and I wish I would have heard more options for what you've thought through. I guess I heard today pros and cons of distance versus hybrid, but not a lot of information about ideas for how we're going to make this successful, which I guess I was expecting to hear in these presentations. So
Yeah. So maybe I'll jump in and help. On the hybrid model, one of the concepts that's been talked about a lot is around a flipped instructional model. I've taught in that model, I've trained in that model, I've trained others in that model. It's a complete pedagogical shift. So if we think about, a teacher teaching online, there's differences and nuances, but teaching full online is more similar to a traditional brick and mortar, or can be more similar to a traditional brick and mortar, than trying to think about a complete new pedagogical structure around flipped instruction. So if we think about trying to build staff capacity to make it more efficient, it's going to be a new way of thinking, a new way of teaching, and a lot of training and content building. So if we think about that flipped model, while a student is at home, a teacher would have created potentially pre-fronted content to lead them into what they would do in a live session the next day. So thinking about how do I create 10, 15-minute targeted content videos that introduce concepts for students that they can understand, which builds in some kind of digital formative assessment, which gives assessment back to the teacher. So then they can pre-group or arrange students as they need to when they show up the next day in person, and then build deep enriched activities for that day that they're in person to go down into those specific contents or standards that they go into. So we're, for us to get to that place of efficiency, we have to, really move away from how we think of traditional instructional pedagogy and really wrap around a new concept and get our staff with capacity built in that framework in order to effectively deliver that way. Otherwise, we have the continued challenge of thinking of how do I teach in person and online simultaneously, which is challenging, and it is not efficient as you're saying. But we have had teachers in our district that have done some flipped instruction and are familiar with it, but it is not the common practice, and it's not the way that teachers are taught in teacher prep school on how to deliver instruction and engage with students on a daily basis.
It's also not the only way.
Yep.
So, Anthony's talked a lot about flipped instruction, but that certainly isn't the only way.
Okay. Director Simons, any follow-up?
No.
Okay, Director Kelsey, Director Dustin-Well. Kelsey, please.
I mean, I just think, I do have a couple questions, but this is really difficult. I think we're all grappling with it, but I do really, I just really defer. I've never been a teacher. I've never been an ESP in the classroom. And so I really, to me, the solution does seem to how do we improve and bring that confidence back. It is taking that time, to ensure that there's some confidence, or the academics will be there. Families are feeling confident going into the school year. Okay, I have a couple questions. One, can somebody remind me, so we've talked about if a student becomes positive in a classroom, so will the entire class be quarantined? Can somebody remind me of that? I think we've talked about it before. It's probably somewhere written down.
I know. Yeah. What we know, the model we've been operating under, Kelsey, which came from MDE and others, is that it has to be fewer than 6 feet apart, 2 students, for example, or any students in the classroom, for at least 15 minutes of consistent contact. So if I was closer to you than 6 feet, and we were having a conversation for at least 15 minutes, or interacting for at least 15 consecutive minutes.
Okay, but if you have a class of kindergartners,
Well, they're supposed to be following those guidelines, right?
So essentially, we have a COVID response team, a centralized district COVID response team. We work very closely with the Department of Health. Anytime that there is a confirmed case, or even if there are symptoms that's displayed, and then they go in and get tested. And we work closely with them to identify all the tracing of the other students. And they have specific questions that the Department of Health asks us. And then they actually make the determination in terms of who needs to be quarantined, or who do we need to notify, things like that. So it really is dependent on that close contact, again, within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, or 15 minutes or more. And then, again, looking at all of those that contact tracing that occurs. So we work really closely with them. We have a crisis, or a COVID response team centralized, but also each individual building has a COVID coordinator. They're working very closely with that centralized.
right, but so if a student's positive, and you contact MD or MDH, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I mean, how long does it take for somebody to be notified? Because like, what if you lived with your 80-year-old grandparent?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I guess I'm,
Yep, so we contact the Department of Health, and obviously, I can't necessarily predict what it's gonna be once schools come back into session. They have been very responsive at this point. Even on Sundays, we're contacting the Department of Health, and they're getting right back to us. So it is a pretty quick turnaround. We're able to do that contact tracing. They give us the guidance, and we have form letters that the Department of Health has given us to utilize, and then we give that information based on that form letter out to those people that they tell us to connect with.
After the first person's tested positive.
it's just that I've seen, my daughter's in athletics, and I know that even one person will shut down a whole team, so. So basically, we're just following the MDE guidelines, and so it's not that the whole class would be quarantined. Okay, so let's say if we move forward with, well, regardless what model it is, what is the role of our ESPs? Moving forward, knowing that, I mean, kind of, I feel like given any model moving forward, there's gonna need to be more support. So I'm just curious of what's kind of the thought behind that, and then I think Anthony's talked about this before, but our ESPs, are they equipped with the proper technology to be able to be really, to provide that support for our teachers?
Well, no, actually, I have, Brian, is that what Brian said?
About it?
Yeah. For the ESPs, yeah, kind of their role.
You can do the training and stuff. Anthony will do the technology piece,
Sorry,
Yeah, good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
Off to a great start. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, that was one of the struggles that we had in the spring with the distance learning, was engaging the non-licensed staff into the process. And we've really been looking at ways that we can involve them more directly with the students. And the distance learning is obviously what creates the challenge for that. And some of the things that we've looked at is trying to provide some virtual help rooms for the non-licensed kids or non-licensed staff, capitalizing on those virtuosities that the ESPs have in supporting learning in a different way. And then also, I think just the collaboration time with the licensed teachers will help facilitate how to better utilize the ESPs during the distance learning time.
So we're still kind of figuring it out of depending what model.
Yeah, again, it's the distance learning that provides the challenges for involving the non-licensed staff. But and I think it's it's something that we have to talk to the labor leaders about too, to try to negotiate, because some of the stuff will obviously go out of the normal duties that they've been assigned during the school day.
So I think one of the key roles that we figured out from last spring was utilizing them for making student contact and connections, to help these teachers with this checking in, kind of that check and connect approach. How can we best utilize, especially our instructional ESPs, to help with those reaching out and making sure we're staying engaged, engaging our students and families in the process. So that brings in making sure they have the technology to do that, and so forth, which I know, Anthony, you spoke to last time too.
And I'll add as well, in Distance Learning Academy, we've talked about ESPs. There'll be instructional ESPs as part of the Distance Learning Academy. As I mentioned, as I met with over 30 teachers last week, we did part of our conversation of how do we utilize and capitalize our ESPs to support the instruction within that environment as well. So we're continuing to process through that with a lot of similar ideas as Brian had mentioned. In terms of the technology, for 2 years now, every ESP who supports instruction in the classroom has been issued a device, and we will be continuing with that as we move forward into this year. I know my team has been reaching out to ESPs, have moved into a new instructional role for the year, and have set them up with deployment dates to receive that technology, either an iPad at the elementary or a Chromebook at the 6 through 12 level. In terms of preparation for ESPs, this is conversations I have had with Becky over the last couple years, that we need to find time to provide adequate training for our ESPs as well. So we're definitely committed to that and continuing to engage in a conversation with the ESP leadership around what does that look like and how do we frame that out. We have the resources and the staff to provide that. It's about carving out the time to do that, which there's some great opportunities if we have additional days before the start of the school year when we know ESPs will all be coming back on the 8th, the first day of normal instruction, that we can build in some of that additional time around training and instruction for them as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just really important to really leverage our ESPs in that. Okay, so I have one more question for you, Anthony. I asked it last time. I just wanted to see if there's any updates on the internet, on access to internet. I know that you've had several different conversations and just interested.
So we continue to process and move forward with different partnerships. The city of Brooklyn Park passed their CARES dollars, and I know there's some allocations in there that we're trying to understand and dig into further around potential grant opportunities for families as well as for potentially school districts. We're looking at another grant opportunity in partnership through 279 Foundation that might bring in some additional dollars for us as a school district to look at hotspots and other internet connectivity solutions. So we do continue to move forward with several conversations with different partners within our communities on how do we continue to build greater capacity around connectivity, as well as, I think, having a broader conversation of how do we turn this into more of a long-term solution, more than just hotspots that'll get us the connectivity we need now, but how do we look at internet as an essential service for our communities and get that broader long-term connection for them.
Thank you. One more question, I'll yield. What's our, and I asked this before, in terms of our homeless and highly mobile student population, is there a plan to provide supports for our students and families who are highly mobile or experiencing homelessness? I mean, as a result of COVID-19, I mean, the reason part of the numbers are so low is because of the governor's order, right? I mean, county brought in hotels. I mean, people are, but at some point it might go away. So I just was curious if those students are still enrolled, and then, you know, how are we tracking to ensure that they're also being served?
Yeah, I can speak to the technology quickly because we do monitor and manage our homeless and highly mobile population, and the DLTL team can speak more to how we liaison and navigate that. But we do continue to provide technology supports and resources to those families as well. Internet connectivity was the big one in the spring, as we have families identified and working with them to ensure they have connectivity. And if their living situation changes where they had connectivity at one moment and now they don't, to ensure that we have that continuity of connectivity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey. You got me back up here. So the other part is we know that the numbers have risen. It's higher than what they've been before. One of the things working with Kate and Student Services is one of the social workers or the social workers are looking at doing some self-study around how has COVID impacted young people from a trauma standpoint since March, right? So now we're looking at that. And then once we have new learning about how to be responsive to that, we're reaching out, and Kate and her team reached out to some of our mobile families recently. And so how do we deploy those supports in a meaningful way? Certainly, Superintendent McIntyre talked about the backpacks. We also have anti-racist group 279 that are doing a backpack drive, I believe, this evening. So we are trying to be very, very intentional and be in communication with our families, with our community about where our resources are, as well as Ron doing a great job with food service to make sure that we can provide meals in a meaningful way.
Thank you.
And Kelsey, we do have a full-time liaison, homeless liaison, and she does regular check-in and check-out with all of our homeless students. So they're very intentionally included, as they should be, in all of our planning. but we hire a homeless liaison that connects with them regularly.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
I didn't get to ask any questions
Other-
yet.
Okay,
I'd like to direct my first question to Kelly Wilson, if that's all right. Kelly, earlier, Laurel talked to us a little bit about staffing, and she also shared a personal piece of information about her experience working in educating in a distance learning or online format. And she expressed that that is oftentimes more difficult and more labor intensive than even classroom learning. And that's the same sentiment that I've heard from hundreds of teachers in our district, that teaching in an online model is extremely challenging, and especially for them, a lot of them is brand new. With that information and the recommendation to move our start date by really 4 business days, how do you feel that teachers are going to respond and be capable of switching from a distance learning model to a hybrid model in this flipped instructional model? Because it sounds like to me what we're going to be asking our teachers is to teach more, to work harder, and to learn how to teach in a new way starting in a month. Have you heard anything from teachers about that, or do they understand that that's what's being asked?
I believe that there is great concern, and you heard me a little bit ago saying I'm not going to tell one of our members that you're spending one job, you're doing this full-time job in person, and you're going home and doing DLA, or distance learning, and yet I've heard that about 3 or 4 times since then, and yeah, I'm getting nervous about that, because that's not what we're going to expect. So I also said earlier, you know, buying us 4 days buys us 4 days. I'm not the superintendent, but I'd ask for more. Yeah, I think we should.
So that's exactly what I'm asking you is, and I also intend to ask the same question of Corey. But to reasonably start, how much time is needed to start and to have all of these things in place that have to be in place, these guidelines that we have to follow to open in a hybrid model? I feel like overwhelmingly what I'm hearing is that it's not possible to do with the time that we have. 4 days isn't enough.
I would agree. I agree with that, and I don't think we're ready yet. How much time? We could all probably say something different. If it's 2 weeks, could we be? The part that in my mind is difficult, it's hybrid, distance learning, hybrid, that's difficult. So to get the extra time, 1 week, 2 weeks, and start distance learning to get going, in my mind, makes sense. Now, also, I would love to get back for 2 weeks to get to know my kids, so before they go to distance, you know, so we've got all that going on too.
Right.
If it was safe, and I just don't think we're there yet. So the extra time to buy in, I think the less back and forth bouncing, the better the instruction. And yes, I'm worried about the expectations that's going to be put on our staff. And I agree, Tanya, that we need to learn from last spring and be better. We can have our staff work effectively, kids, in a distance learning model with a group of 3 to 5 kids. My wife is an ESP. She's got a teaching degree. She just hasn't gone back to teaching since my son was born 32 years ago. But she can manage a class of 4, and particularly our ESPs spend so much time of their day already having conversations about kids about nothing about math or science, but just their day, and that's what they need. Right? So we should and we can learn better ways to do things, and I think we should. And yes, I'm worried about the workload as well.
Thank you.
And I don't know if that answered any of your questions. but-
No, it did. I just wanted to hear from you what you're hearing, because I'm hearing from teachers that they're really concerned about this back and forth business and the workload of teaching all online and then also being expected to teach online and teach a classroom in the same week. How am I going to teach all these kids two different ways at the same time?
Yep.
So thank you. And Corey, I would appreciate it if you could answer the question as well.
I will if, it's in my recommendation if you want to wait till that point of your
Oh.
presentation.
Okay.
Or I can do it now, whatever you'd like.
That can wait.
Yeah.
I have a couple of other questions. Operationally, this is for Ron. In somewhere in here, now I don't remember where it was, I forgot to mark it. We were it was mentioned that staff would be in buildings so that they could perform their duties, record their lessons, whatever. How does that impact us? For example, if we were to have all of our buildings operating normally, we don't have students in there, how does that change our actual expenses?
Yeah, that's a good question. So certainly if we have staff in the building, our custodial staff will want to keep coming in, cleaning our buildings, working with our staff to make sure that we're doing the same level of sanitation in our buildings.